Good morning, everybody. Good to see you here this morning for our planning meeting. And first of all, can I give a warm welcome to our members of the public in the public gallery. I'm sure that you will have been well looked after this morning by our wonderful officers who have greeted you. So if you're sitting comfortably, then I think we're going to begin, as they say. But thank you for coming this morning. Thank you also to members for their attendance of this committee meeting, and also, of course, to officers as well. The three go together. Now, this is possibly one of the more significant statements that I'll be making this morning. Members will be used to this, but we have to go through the microphone etiquette and usage. So if members of the public would like to bear with me on this, this is an important part of the meeting, but one that we have to go through. May I remind all attendees to use the microphones when speaking. Please remember to turn on the microphone when speaking, ensuring that you speak into the microphone itself or in the direction of the microphone. I told you it was exciting stuff, yeah. And once you have finished speaking, please turn it off. Correct usage of the system will allow for an enjoyable sound experience for all. This sounds like a Marks and Spencer's advert, doesn't it, really? This isn't just any sound system, this is our sound system, yeah. And you will, just in case you're interested in reading this, apparently you will find a laminated copy of the detailed instructions on each row. So I hope we've digested all that important information, even though I repeat it every time for members. So there we go. Can we move on to declarations of interest? And could I ask if there are any declarations of interest? Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. A personal and prejudicial interest in item 3 on the agenda, application 23/0766. It relates to land held in my pension fund.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for declaring that. Can we just be very clear? That would mean Councillor Collins would leave during the discussion and then come back in. Yes, just for members of the public as well. Just in case they think you're just paying a visit to the loo, etc. But that's a requirement of that declaration. Thank you. Could I turn now to confirmation of minutes? And the minutes for the last planning meeting, which was on the 17th of April, 24. Could I have a proposer? Thank you. I've got a proposer with Councillor Evans and a seconder, Councillor Collins. Thank you. That's an accurate record. Yeah, could we have a vote? All those in favour? Thank you. Over to you, Catherine. Have we got any substitute members, please?
There's no substitutes on this occasion, Chairman. I've just had apologies from Councillor Goodman.
Okay, thank you very much. So one apology, no substitutes today. We're now going to turn to planning matters. And I'll briefly, for your information in the public gallery particularly, just go through briefly the protocol that we apply. First of all, on item one we will be dealing with first. We tend to try and deal with items first that have speakers. And then if we have people coming in, then they know that they're going to be dealing with that particular item, and they're here as well to speak. We have a short presentation by the officers when we come to an application with speakers, and after a very short presentation, we'll have a break for the speaker to come forward, and then the Vice Chair will explain the protocol relating to that. Do you want to say anything at this point, or perhaps when they come up?
I'll wait.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Vice Chair. After the speakers have finished, we then return to the officer, who will then complete a full and comprehensive presentation. Normally what happens is we have reports in front of us, very comprehensive reports from the officers with their recommendations. We also have speakers who provide us with their views and sometimes further information. And then once all that is finished, we will then go to the debate or questions, and members then will, having all that information before them, ask questions, have an exchange of views, and then come to a judgment about that particular application. And we do on this committee, it's very important to stress this, have extensive discussions, which means some of our meetings are long, but it does mean that all members feel, and they should feel, that they have an opportunity to express their views, which is really important. So we move to item 1. I should also point out that in terms of the protocol, I think I'm right in saying this, Catherine, that if a member arrives whilst we've started, is it the debate or at the very beginning, the information in the presentation, they can't actually take part, they can't actually vote? At which point is it?
I would argue it needs to be from the start of, from the point where we start the whole application.
That was my understanding, but I just wanted clarity on that because we've got 1 or 2 members missing. So if they attend now, they can't really take part in this particular debate, can they? I believe there are some local transport problems. A number of trains have been cancelled, and I think we've had something going on in Wharton again, because I think Councillor Griffiths said she came through Wharton fine, and then others have come through Wharton and it's really bad. Is that right, Councillor Evans?
Yes.
Okay, right, just to get that one cleared up. Okay, so now we move to item 1. So I hand over to our planning officer, Andrew Stell, who will do a brief presentation, and then we'll go to, I think we have 3 speakers, I think.
We're going to have time for the wet observations.
We will, yes.
John doing the presentation.
Yes, okay, you're right, okay. Okay.
Okay, good morning. Yes, so this is application number 22/0461, land to the west of Cropper Road. The site, the general area of the site is circled in red on the plan there. So just an overview of the proposed development. So the application is a full application for 350 houses, comprising 72 2-bed, 104 3-bed, 174 4-bed. There would be 4.22 hectares of open space, which is also flood attenuation land. I'll talk about that more later. 1 equipped area for play with 4 trim trails. Other associated developments, that includes things such as a pumping station, boundaries, some retaining structures, parking areas, the kind of thing you'd expect on a housing development. And the proposal also includes a range of contributions that are on the screen there. I'll talk about those more in the presentation later in full as well, though. So just a brief bit about the application background. The application site relates to 2 separate parcels of land within the, to the west of Cropper Road and north of School Lane. They both fall within the wider allocated Cropper Roads West and White Hills site. There was a previous application for 350 houses on the same site. There was a resolution by committee to grant, subject to 106, but this application was not progressed. And that's why we have this new application before you today. The new application has significant amendments, primarily to overcome issues relating to flood risk, but also to make changes to the design and layout of the scheme as well. So I mentioned that the application was in 2 parcels and it's part of a wider allocated site. So on this plan, the 2 parcels, 220461, you can see kind of here and this L-shaped section here. So they are divided by another application site. So these sites that aren't shaded in kind of orange or brown are part of the wider allocated site in the local plan. The other shaded sites are, this one up here with the reference number is another housing site that's coming forward. And this one between them is a housing site that has been built out recently. Okay. So I think at this point we would.
I'm
sorry.
just going to. I'm just wondering because we've had another member arrive, and I think she missed the first minute. So I think it might be appropriate just to repeat that information.
Yep.
So that we have all members fully involved. I mean, literally, you've just started, but I want to make sure through the protocol that we actually observe the proper thing. So if you could start again, because we've literally done a minute or two.
Okay.
Are everybody happy with that? Yes. Okay. Thank you.
So the application for you today, 220461, is for housing development on land to the west of Cropper Road. That image there, just the red circle, shows the general area of the site. The proposed development is for 350 houses. That includes 72 two-bed, 104 three-bed, and 174 four-bed. 4.22 hectares of open space, which is also flood attenuation land, which I'll talk about more later. Equipped area for play with trim trails, and other associated development, which includes things like boundaries, retaining structures, pumping station, parking areas, things that are fairly typical for a housing development. The contributions that are listed there will be talked about in more detail later in my presentation as well. So don't worry if you've not had time to read that in full, we will go over that again. There is some background to this application. There was a previous application for 350 homes on the same site. There was a resolution by committee to grant this in 2018, subject to 106 being signed. However, this was not progressed, and there's a new application before you today, which has significant amendments compared to that previous scheme, largely to overcome issues relating to flood risk, but also with changes to design and layout. This plan here just shows the application and as part of the allocated site and other nearby applications. So 220461 has two parcels here and lower down here. They are in the same application, or they're separated. The other sites that aren't shaded kind of orange or brown are part of the same wider allocated site. The brown site up here is a forthcoming housing site, and this orange one in between is a housing site that has been built out recently. Okay, I think I covered all of the same information there, so I think we'll take a pause for speakers now.
Now, obviously, I'm aware, members will be aware that you've received fairly extensive late observations. So my usual way of dealing with this is to give you a little bit of time now. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm not putting a time on this, but I'm just asking you to look at the late obs for item 1, not the other item, but just item 1 at this, and then when we're ready to go, we'll continue with the presentation with the speakers. Yeah. I'm just wondering now whether we can proceed, whether we're fairly close to that, or if the members need a little bit more time. Quite happy either way. Okay, most people seem to be nodding that they're okay. Going ahead. Okay. So I'm going to hand over to the Vice Chair now, and he will introduce the speakers and go through the protocol. So thank you, Vice Chair.
Many thanks. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As the Chairman's already pointed out, public speakers are an integral part of the process, a very important part. To ensure fairness to everybody, both for and against applications, and I'm sure you've already been briefed on this, each speaker will have 3 minutes to make the point. I have got my trusty 1980s vintage stopwatch to ensure that 3 minutes is adhered to. I'll give you a 15-second warning towards the end of that, and if you're still speaking, I'll ask you to bring it to a conclusion. So without further ado then, I believe we have 3 speakers on this application, and the first name I have on the list is Mr. Trevor Torrens. Trevor, if you care to come forward.
Good morning.
It's in your own time.
Yeah. Good morning, and thanks for taking the time to listen to me. I wasn't expecting to spend my birthday doing this. Thank you. I've come here today simply because I live on Bambridge Lane. I live bordering the site that's being proposed. I've come to object to the site. I have 2 reasons, in principle, or 2 elements of the application that I wish to object to. The first is I don't believe it's suitable for that area, the continued development. But I also notice that the delegated authority has been asked for, and I do not think that is appropriate. I think originally when this application was made in 2017, there was a master plan that was put together that showed the development for the whole of the area. We've now moved to it being developed in individual parcels. Without a master plan, you will find a dog's dinner of the development. There is no coordination, no integration, no bringing it together. Until all developers are ready to develop and committed to develop, you cannot guarantee that the infrastructure, the roads, whatever, is coordinated and is put together. For that reason, I believe that this application should not be approved today. It should be reconsidered as and when the full integrated master plan from all developers is available and is committed to. I think moving forward from that, the question of delegated authority, this is a major development. It has a significant impact on an area, and to delegate that without a master plan, without an overall considered view of how it will affect the whole, is inappropriate at this point in time. The committee needs to set the policy and the principles for the officers to make decisions within. A master plan is needed for that. Hence, I don't believe delegation is appropriate. I think also, just picking up and being a little bit narky as somebody that lives in the area, there are an awful lot of theoretical reports that have been written. They are full of theory. They are full of models. They are wonderful. I've spent the last 7 years reading them. But they don't reflect real life. Flooding, for an example. Within the reports, it says there isn't that too bad around the land. I need wellies to walk into my field at the back of my house. My neighbours have been underwater for the last 8 months. The attenuation plans will only push more water onto our properties. Until all of those matters are dealt with, this application should not be approved. That'll take me about there.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Torrens. The next speaker I have is Mr. Colin Williams. Mr. Williams, if you care to. Good morning. When you're ready, if you press the left hand button, it should turn green. 3 minutes in your own time, I think.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, members, for giving us the opportunity to speak today. I'm taking a separate approach to the last speaker in that I represent the developer that has land that was wedged in between those two parcels that you saw on the map. We've had an application in for over 3 years, and we've been waiting to have meaningful discussions, which we did have actually last week with the head of planning, to agree what a master plan would look like. In March 2022, we signed up to a master plan with Wayne Homes, and then they went forward with a separate application to set their own layout. One thing we've explained to the officers is you need to treat it like a jigsaw. If there's a piece missing, you don't get the full integration, which you've heard today. So we have the piece of land that Lancashire Highways are asking you to support the application on the basis that you get an integrated strategic link, which puts all the sites together to create sustainable development in accordance with policy M1. Now, that is your key local plan policy that you as members should determine the application on that basis. If you cannot be satisfied that that is complied with, and you get the integration that Lancashire Highways are saying is predicated on their support, then you're going to approve or grant delegated powers to the head of planning to say, try and resolve it. Well, Lancashire Highways last Wednesday agreed to set up a workshop with ourselves, with Fylde Council, and with Wayne Homes. Now, until that workshop has been, done, and we have an agreed master plan that you as an authority can sign up to. At the end of the day, it's a strategic site, but there is no authority-led master plan. There's no Fylde Council-led master plan. There's only a Wayne Homes plan at this stage. So until that happens, you're in danger of giving a commitment in principle to the head of planning to resolve a number of detailed matters. But the first element in your recommendation is to continue discussing the master plan approach. So it would be inappropriate at this stage to get that delegation below your level, which is the decision level for this application, until you can be satisfied that there is a master plan that can bring together all of the sites within the strategic allocation to deliver the sustainable development the policy M1 of the local plan requires. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Many thanks, Mr. Williams. The final speaker we have on this item is Mr. Gareth Salthouse, who is the agent.
Yeah.
It's all set.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The site was allocated by the Council for development in 2018, and this was reaffirmed through the 2021 partial review local plan. And members resolved to grant outline planning permission for 350 homes on the site in 2020. This full application was submitted to the Council 2 years ago, and we've had extensive and positive discussions with the officers. There have been many changes to the scheme because of these discussions, and the final scheme before you will deliver a range of benefits. It will support the vision set out through the local plan for a sustainable new neighbourhood in Whitehills, through front-loading substantial new infrastructure as part of the initial phases of development, including road widening and improvements to Cropper Road, the delivery of a new link road, 4 new quality bus stops, and a financial contribution to facilitate a new bus service, and creating critical mass to support new services in the area, such as the bus service, the local service centre, and other community facilities. The scheme will also provide 105 affordable homes, ecology enhancements that far exceed policy requirements. So whereas there's a requirement for 10% biodiversity net gain, this scheme delivers 20% for habitats, 92% for hedgerows, 31% for river units, open space and green infrastructure, double the local plan policy requirement with footways and cycleways, and new trim trail and leap play equipment for existing and future residents. The drainage strategy agreed by the local flood authority reflects policy guidance and will discharge at pre-development greenfield runoff rates with no increased risk of flooding. In terms of fluvial flooding, the new properties will be safe over the lifetime as agreed by the Environment Agency, and there'll be a net reduction in the risk of flooding for properties off-site. In terms of Mr. Williams's points and some of Mr. Torrens's points, the master plan is an overarching vision and framework at a very high level, and the individual planning application provides the detail. There is a comprehensive master plan as agreed by your officers, and it's been over 2 years in discussions as the agreement of all the landowners in the site allocation. Originally had the agreement of Mr. Collins' client, but more recently not his agreement over concern about connectivity. But the master plan in our scheme provide 2 potential vehicle connections into Mr. Williams's site. And it's up to Mr. Williams and the LPA through his planning application to agree whether one of those connections is appropriate or both of them. Our scheme doesn't prejudice either coming forward, and thank you. And it actually provides certainty for all parties, and it makes no sense to withhold planning permission for our client scheme for issues that should be resolved through Mr. Williams' own planning application. The scheme accords with local and national planning policy,
We are at town.
and there's no objections from consultees. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Many thanks. Thank you, speakers. I'll hand back to the chairman now. Thank you for your input. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We're now going to go back to the planning officer, and just to say that obviously in his presentation he will hope to pick up and address some of the points that have been made by the speakers, and also some of the points that members will have seen articulated in the late observation sheets before you, as well as making the more general presentation of the application. So can I hand over now to John, please?
Thank you. Okay, so just to briefly recap then, before we carry on, that the proposed development is for 350 houses, 72 two-beds, 104 three-beds, 174 four-bed. 30% of those will be affordable homes. There will be 4.22 hectares of open space, flood attenuation basins, an area of play, trim trails, other associated development, which we'll see in a bit more detail as we go through. So just to go through those contributions at this point then in a bit more detail. So following from the 30% affordable housing, there's also be funding to support the provision of a regular bus service linking the site with St Anne's and Blackpool for a period of 5 years. And that's being delivered as part of the wider allocated site, so other developments that come forward will contribute to that as well. £18,000 for travel plan monitoring, 310,000 towards healthcare, and then 770,000 towards primary school places, just over £1 million towards secondary school places, agreements for the future management of open spaces, just over £7,000 towards the improvement of a bridleway, and the council's legal monitoring fees. So this plan here shows the general proposed layout. It's probably the best plan just to see an overview of the entire site and what's proposed. You can see the general arrangement is that there is one main route through the site, which effectively bypasses part of the existing Cropper Road. Later in the presentation, I'll show in a bit more detail how that connects into Cropper Road and to the surrounding network. There's another access down towards the south nearest School Lane, and up at the northern end of the site, there's a loop form here, whereas the rest of the site is mainly short cul-de-sacs. And then the link here that's outside of the red line, that's been mentioned by a few of the speakers, and I'll discuss that in a bit more detail later, but that's the...
Chair, we can't see here. We're struggling to where you put it.
Ah, right, okay.
Laser pointer.
Oh no, that's it. Is that, can you see that? Okay, well so this section here, that's the link between the two parts of the site that's been mentioned by a few of the speakers and that there's been some discussion about. So I may as well mention it now then. So part of the recommendation is delegated authority, and one of the elements of that is to address some points relating to layout, which we consider to be minor points. One of those is that link road, and although the speaker, who's the agent for that site, has voiced some concerns, the proposed layouts we have at the moment from both of those applicants, the points of connection are close and not exactly aligned, so there is more discussion that is required. But we have had discussions with the Highways Department, who consider there are a number of options in terms of how that could be delivered, and they're comfortable that there's flexibility to achieve what needs to be achieved. The agent for this application mentioned that they had added in the option of another access into the site. That wasn't originally proposed, but in terms of the master planning process and making sure that the sites have got the option to fit together, that's been provided as a possibility. So it won't necessarily be required, but it's just to ensure that this application, when it's finalised and is determined, it can fit in with the wider allocated site as best as possible. Okay. So the main considerations of the principle of development, well, we can refer to policy M1 in the local plan, which is the policy for master planning, which is used for sites such as this. And that policy sets out a range of considerations which relate to other policies in the plan. And it's considered that the most pertinent points for this application are a comprehensive approach, matters relating to flood risk, high quality design, highways and access, ecology and biodiversity net gain, education, healthcare, housing, and open space. So I'll go through each of those matters now. So in terms of a comprehensive approach, the policy requires that the strategic locations of development should be considered as a whole, with a comprehensive approach to making the development sustainable. So a master plan report has been provided with this application, which includes details of access, movement, flood risk and delivery, with consideration of the wider allocated site included in each part of the report. Now that includes the agents for the other parts of the wider allocated site. So there are 4 other applications. 3 of the agents have reviewed the master plan and agreed to the general principles. And the agent for one of the sites you've heard today, they haven't agreed to it, and they voiced some concerns that have been discussed. However, officers are of the opinion that the master plan sets out a general, appropriate, high-level strategy, that it doesn't preclude the other development coming forward, and it doesn't predetermine or kind of overly restrict how those other elements would come forward. That's the opinion of officers. We consider that there is enough flexibility and that the general principles shown in the master plan report that's been submitted are acceptable. And that's been in conjunction with consultation with the relevant consultees, such as Highways, that we've mentioned. Yes. Okay, and this is the key plan from that master planning report. So this is an illustrative master plan. So this shows the general principles that I discussed there about access, routes through. Although it does show a pattern of development, that's indicative. That's not supposed to show exactly how the buildings would be arranged within the site. Indeed, there have been kind of some changes made to this applicant's own site, but it's just to show that the general relationship between the sites and the wider area has been considered, and that the site can be brought forward without giving rise to any significant issues. Okay, so moving on to the next point, so flood risk. So the previous application for this site was submitted when the wider site was in flood zone 1, and then the flood risk designation of the site was changed. And during the plan making process, the inspector was informed of the change. The site was still considered to be suitable in principle for the development and was therefore allocated. So one thing that's in your late observations report, there are 2 matters in there actually that relate to flood risk and what's referred to as the sequential test. So as part of an application where there is a higher level of flood risk, it's usual that a sequential test will be carried out to identify whether there are any preferable sites that could be delivered instead. The idea being to steer development away from areas of flood risk, and then followed by an exceptions test, and the supporting documents. So the main point in the late observations is that a sequential test was provided and it was published and consulted on. However, officers at the time, we did not, in our reports, commit to a position as to whether that sequential test was strictly required or not. And that's simply because there were a number of potential ways of interpreting what the National Planning Policy Framework says and the Planning Practice Guidance says. The agent for this application had advised that, in their opinion, it was required. But officers were of the opinion that the process was the same, whether or not it was required, in that a sequential test had been provided, and therefore we didn't need to concern ourselves too much at that time with whether or not the sequential test was required. However, we now have the benefit of the two appeal decisions for the adjacent Garden Place site, which has been issued within the last couple of weeks. The inspector in that decision makes it clear that, in their opinion, the sequential test is necessary and is required. So the late observation report is to update effectively the explanation behind the process that's happened, to agree with the agent for the applicant. But the key thing you need to just be made aware of is that it doesn't actually have an impact on how the process was carried out, the information that was received, consulted on, how it was considered, and the decision that was made. So it's kind of a procedural issue, a technical issue, but the procedure was correct. We did have a letter from the agent for other interested parties where they queried whether the sequential test was appropriate. They said that, in their opinion, it wasn't robust enough. Officer's opinion is that the sequential test is robust enough. It identifies an area of search. It identifies potential sites that could deliver a similar number of housing. In this case, the threshold was set at 100 homes and above, and obviously this is for 350 homes. And it assessed those sites in terms of their suitability. Of sites that potentially were available, those sites were considered not to be close enough to the White Hills area and also to result in more landscape harm. The reason why it matters that they weren't considered to be close to the White Hills area and other developments is that one of the main purposes of allocating this site was to deliver a critical mass of housing to be able to support a neighbourhood centre in this area, following previous housing development which had come forward when the local authority didn't have a 5-year housing land supply and housing was brought forward on sites that weren't allocated. So it's considered of utmost importance that the housing development that comes forward is close enough to support that critical mass, to support a neighbourhood centre with services for the nearby houses that have already come forward and would come forward as part of this application. So officers are confident that the process has been correct, that the sequential assessment is appropriate, is robust, and that its findings are appropriate. That is explained in the officer report that was already published as well. So on top of that, the relevant consultees, so Environment Agency, United Utilities, Lead Local Flood Authority, have provided various comments throughout the lifetime of this application. There has been a lot of back and forth in terms of making sure that the water management on site will be appropriate. Notably, the Environment Agency withdrew their initial objection, stating that they were now satisfied with the proposals, that the design was appropriate, and importantly, that there will not be an increase in flood risk off the site as a result of this development, and that it will deal with water on the site in an appropriate way as well. Okay. So in terms of high quality design, policy GD7 in the local plan sets out a wide range of factors to consider when looking at design. The layout of this site is primarily influenced by the relatively large attenuation basins, a number of ditches that run across the site, and the surrounding highways infrastructure that it connects into. The position of the attenuation basins, which effectively form the main areas of open space on the site, the position of those has been informed by technical requirements in terms of the areas of flood risk on the site. Officers, we had extensive discussions with the applicant to ensure that they were as incorporated into the site as possible, so that people on the site could make use of them, so that they had as much of a positive visual impact on the site that open space can have. And a balance has been found where they have to be in the area where the flood risk is highest, but they've been incorporated into the site. The range of house types, which I'll show you some example house types on the screen in a moment, is considered to reflect local character. Some parts of the site do feature high boundaries in response to levels and also some noise issues towards the northern end of the site, closer to Progress Way. Changes have been made to the scheme to reduce the apparent height of those boundaries to residents, for example, within their gardens. So changes to the steps between houses have been made, and where the higher attenuation fence is required, the gardens have been some of them have been given a terrace form, so that when you're stood within the garden, you'll have a garden, a step up, another layer of garden, and then the fence. And that's effectively to reduce the apparent height up, so rather than just a level garden and then a fence. And that's shown on the plans as well. And the gardens are considered to be large enough that the terraces aren't going to make those gardens feel cramped. Yes, and then I've mentioned there that there have been a range of changes to design and layout, adjusting the position of houses, incorporating double-fronted houses on corner positions, reducing the amount of front parking. I think there are probably some plans to go over some of these things. Yeah, so this is an example sketch plan that's come out from as part of the discussions between officers and the applicant to make changes to landscaping throughout the scheme, to disperse front parking, to realign houses. So we've looked at a micro detail as well as a macro detail to ensure that the appearance of the streets is acceptable. One of the features that's talked about in the report with this scheme that's worth mentioning is that the main road through the site, generally for larger housing developments, we would expect to see a wider road with perhaps a verge or trees. Because of the significant amount of space that's required for attenuation on this site, there is less space effectively to play with. And one of the things, one of the results of that is that the main road is still wide enough to satisfy highways requirements, but in terms of design requirements, it's not exactly as we would expect to see. However, the amount of open space on the site is about double the amount that policy would require. So there's benefits that result from that. And as I said, we've looked for opportunities to introduce landscaping throughout that main route and disperse front parking. So it shouldn't be a road that just is dominated by front parking and quite hard. It'll be softened by landscaping and cars shouldn't dominate it. So these are some of images of the example house types. There are, I think, 10 or 12 different house types across the site. And then the plan version of one of those house types, because I know that visuals and plans can often give quite different impressions of houses. The key things are that there are elevational details, sills and lintels. There's some details around the eaves on some of the houses. So it's considered that there's enough visual interest to the houses to be appropriate, and that these are in keeping with the other houses that have come forward in the local area. Landscaping, so I talked about efforts to introduce landscaping throughout the scheme. Down here, introduction of footpaths through the attenuation areas and planting, and then front trees in gardens throughout the scheme, particularly around the ditches that cross and corner points. And then we've talked a bit about boundaries. So as well as the, whilst there are a few small areas of higher boundaries for attenuation and levels, the general approach to boundaries is typical for a housing development, where there will be brick walls for garden boundaries that are exposed to the street and to view, timber fences for garden boundaries between rear gardens where they aren't exposed to view, some knee rail fencing around some of the open areas. Okay. Okay, so highways, then there have been extensive discussions between Lancashire County Council Highways, the applicant and officers throughout the lifetime of this application. There have been changes made to the proposed layout, to parking, various features of the roads to satisfy highway requirements and also to satisfy officer requests in terms of design and amenity. Ultimately, the Highway Authority are satisfied that the proposals are acceptable subject to a range of conditions. Those conditions are to secure certain principles, and then also subject to off-site highways enhancements. So those are some junction improvements in the nearby area. Also the provision of 4 quality bus stops in the scheme that will serve the new bus route that will run through it. The proposed development meets or exceeds the parking standards, so that's either dwellings meet the requirements or they exceed it. So overall, it's considered that the highways impacts will be acceptable. I've got a few slides here where I'll just talk about the way that the new main road through the site will effectively form a bypass to the existing Cropper Road. So that's the overall plan, but I'll just show something that should make it easier to see the key points. So this plan here, so this is School Road, and then this is Cropper Road coming into the site. That effectively will remain unchanged. I think some of the off-site highway contributions will go towards this junction, but this proposal doesn't propose any changes to that. Cropper Road will still come in as before. And then the first point where it deviates to come into the site, which is just after Pasture Close. This hatch mark on the plan shows where Cropper Road will then be closed to vehicles. It will still be open for pedestrians and cycles. Then as we come through towards the centre of the site, again connecting into the adjacent housing development, that access will, instead of effectively coming in from Cropper Road, will come in through the site. Again, this hatched area showing where at the other end of Cropper Road, it's closed to vehicles but open to pedestrians and cycles. And then back at the other end, connecting back, this is close to Progress Way and Dickies Lane South. And it will connect back in with a slight realignment here, and the existing Cropper Road access, providing the existing access to some of the dwellings that are along it before it comes to here and becomes closed off to vehicles. So that's the key parts about the Cropper Road. Effectively, the development will form a link road that bypasses it. The reason that's been done is that initially the approach might have been to upgrade Cropper Road and retain that as an access. Highways advised that approach wasn't suitable for a number of reasons, primarily just due to the space available for the existing Cropper Road. So this alternative, providing a link through, was considered to be the best approach. So in terms of ecology and biodiversity net gain, you heard from the agent for the applicant that significant increase in terms of biodiversity net gain has been delivered, which is summarised in the final point there. The relevant consultees have raised no objection to the proposal, again subject to a range of conditions, but standard conditions that you'd expect to see for this type of development. Importantly, the potential impact on protected sites has been considered, and a habitats regulation assessment has been provided to the relevant consultees. It's the intention of officers that will be adopted by the council. Effectively, that just demonstrates that consideration of protected sites has been given. It demonstrates that there won't be harmful impacts, and that the characteristics of the proposal are appropriate. And again, with regards to protected species on site, there have been surveys, including recent updates, because of the length of time that the application had been in. The relevant surveys were updated, provided back to our consultees who confirmed that the proposals were acceptable in terms of those impacts. So this green infrastructure plan, which again is from the master planning document, just gives a good impression of the overall green areas through the site. I've mentioned the significant amount of open space, and I think this plan just kind of gives a good understanding of that. One of the points that we are still discussing with the applicant, which is explained in the report, just relates to some of the trees along the northern boundary of the site. Officers are of the opinion that there needs to be some minor changes to the layout just to allow a bit more space between the development and the trees. That's in conjunction with the council's tree officer. Those discussions are ongoing. It's anticipated that should amendments be made, they will be minor, effective probably to create an offset of maybe another metre that might in turn have a very slight knock-on on the position of houses in the road just at the northern corner of the site, but in a way that would be minor, wouldn't change the way that the site was viewed from from outside of the site, the way that properties related to each other. Officers would obviously ensure that separation distances were still acceptable. So it's anticipated that should those changes be made, they will be minor. So the other considerations, and most of these really kind of relate to some form of contribution as well, although not all. One is that the local authority have been consulted with regards to education impacts, and a request for money towards the creation of primary and secondary school places has been provided. Again, with healthcare, the consultation has been carried out. There is something in the late observations report about that. And that's again because of the length of time the application had been in. Although the health authority had been consulted, we hadn't received a response, but we wanted to make sure that we did have an up-to-date response from them. So we chased that, and it did transpire that they needed to change their request. That's for a larger amount because the calculation that they use against the number of bedrooms has changed compared to when they ran the calculation 2 years ago. And it's also where the money will be spent has also been changed as well. Again, because things have changed in terms of where the health service would need to spend that money. The provision of 30% affordable homes, with 32% of them being M42 accessible and adaptable dwellings. So that's a dwelling that meets a certain standard in terms of access requirements. Now, the officer's report discusses this particular point because there is the policy as drafted in the local plan requires a lower amount, but of a different, a house that meets a slightly different standard. And through discussions with the applicant, the provision of and I think that's 15% provision. So through discussions with the applicant, it's considered that provision of twice the number of houses that are still accessible and adaptable. The idea is generally for older people or certain people with certain mobility requirements. That's considered to be a more appropriate solution for this site. The most accessible homes would typically be located also closer to existing service centres. That's not to say that they couldn't be provided on this site as well, but the strategy to secure a higher number of homes that meet a slightly different standard is considered to be a positive of this proposal. Again, we've talked about open space quite a lot, so you can see the numbers there, that it's nearly double the policy requirement. So there really is a large amount of open space on this site. And it's worth mentioning that the modelling shows that the flooding of those attenuation areas will be a very rare occurrence, such that the areas will be suitable to have planting and landscaping and footpaths within them. So for the significant majority of the time, they will be usable as open space. It's in excess of a 1 in 100 event. I think the report sets out it's something like it's in excess of 1 in 100, somewhere between 1 in 100 and 1 in 500, that it's anticipated that they would hold any significant amount of water. And then the other point is on phasing, which I believe I have a phasing plan on the next slide. So one of the things that's come out of discussions between officers and the applicant is agreeing this phasing strategy. The main takeaway is that the the kind of browny orange colour here will be phase one, and it will include the delivery of the link road. So that means in the first phase of development, the link road will be completed, which will allow the bus route to begin operating as envisaged. And then it also means as the rest of the parts, the other phases come through, they'll be able to make use of that road. So yeah, officers considered that securing the delivery of that full link road in phase one was acceptable, and the applicant was happy to agree to that. So the recommendation, which is set out in the report, it's a request for delegation to the head of planning for any decision to be made in consultation with the chairman and the vice chairman, with reference of 4 elements to be satisfied. The first is further consideration of the layout and proposed development. So I've talked about those points and what those elements might be. The second is the adoption of the habitats regulation assessment. Again, I mentioned that. So that has been prepared, has been reviewed. So the process of adopting that is purely one of, effectively it's a technical matter. So there's no further consultation that needs to be carried out on that. Number 3, the completion of the Section 106 agreement. The Section 106 is at an advanced stage, is mostly drafted, but obviously it will await all parties to sign up to that. And then the preparation of the final planning conditions. So some of those will still need to be finalised following any further changes to the layout, but the conditions will be as per those requested by consultees and considered to be necessary by officers as well. So, and again, we've gone through the Section 106 content, but there it is on the screen if you just wanted a reminder, because I appreciate there are a number of elements to it. Just double check I don't have another slide. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank the officer for a very detailed and comprehensive presentation there. And at this stage, I invite members now to come forward with questions, comments, and the debate will then begin. Councillor Nixon first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Wow, it's massive, isn't it? Okay, I've got a number of questions we'll go through. Neighbourhood centre, where exactly is that going to be?
Yeah, so let me just flick back to one of the earlier slides. So apologies, I should have made it clear. The neighbourhood centre is part of one of the other allocated sites within the wider allocation. So, and that's the sites that have been subject to the recent appeal. So that will be coming forward, but is effectively kind of further behind in the timeline. So the housing that's part of this application is, so in the allocation of the local plan, it talked about achieving a critical mass of housing in the local area to support the delivery of a neighbourhood centre. So this housing is critical to enabling that neighbourhood centre to come forward.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it's subject to a separate application.
Well, that sort of answers my next question. So I was saying for the neighbourhood and development, does it have to wait for the next site to come forward, which clearly it does, doesn't it, for that development? That's fine. The terraced gardens, since I've been on planning, which a few years now, but I've never heard of a terraced garden. So that does actually strike me that there is a recognised problem with water on that site.
Apologies then. So the terraces are nothing to do with flood risk or water management. In some of the areas, so it's up at this top corner of the site, there's an area where there is a higher fence that effectively at the end of the gardens, and that's to do with ensuring that those outside amenity spaces have appropriate noise levels, just because some of them are closer to the road and some of the commercial operations that take place further down Dickie's Lane. So because it is a higher boundary, which goes up to about, I think it's 2.4, 2.5 metres, it was considered that if you imagine you're standing inside your garden and at the end of your garden is a 2.5 metre fence, it might feel a bit high. Usually we'd expect to see 1.8, maybe 2.1 metre fences. So it's a little bit higher. Because there was room within those gardens, one way of effectively reducing the apparent height of that is to, if you imagine you're stood in your garden and then partway down the garden, the garden raises up by 0.5 metre or whatever it might be, with a few steps up to a higher section of lawn, so that when that connects with the fence at the back, it's effectively concealed part of the apparent height. So it gives people a garden that's a split level garden, just to reduce the effective height of the apparent height of the boundary at the end. It's nothing to do with water management.
But I mean, at the end of the day, water will find its lowest level regardless of where you put a terrace. There will be, how is that going to affect the property and the lower end of the garden? And how are you going to make sure that that water doesn't run down into that house?
So they're in terms of drainage, they're small, relatively small areas, but they're areas that are shown to be lawn, so there'll be infiltration, and effectively the water management within those gardens, when you've got an area of grass like that and like that, or if you've got two like that, the way that water is managed within that garden is, in practical terms, is very similar. So it's not expected that there would be any.
Yeah, that's
change in the
relying
way
on
that it
people
behaves.
keeping it as a lawn, isn't it, really?
Well, there's also drainage systems proposed
Yeah,
within the
underneath.
gardens and plots
Okay.
as well.
All right.
Yeah.
Right, next one, sorry. How many ditches, you mentioned some ditches that run through what's the process of it? Are they going to be culverted? Are they going to be left open? What's going to be the process with them?
Yeah, so they will, for the most part, the significant majority, they'll be left open. So I think there are 4 main ditches that run across this site, and then there are some adjacent to the other boundaries. You can probably get an impression of where they are by seeing where there are some natural breaks in the layouts. So for the majority, they're left uncovered, and that's consistent with advice from Environment Agency, Natural England, that kind of shouldn't culvert ditches where possible. Where roads or other kind of footpaths, cycle paths cross them, then they would be culverted for short sections. Those elements of the proposals have been they've been in the proposals when the Environment Agency, Natural England, Greater Manchester Ecology Unit have been consulted. So there will be some impact, but it will be the significant kind of minority of the total area of ditches.
So the ditches themselves now, in a ditch in itself, it grows vegetation, it will have, initially the site will be under a maintenance plan for keeping everything clear and whatever. Who eventually is going to look after those ditches, because they do bog up, and then that's when you start getting which we know from other areas of the file, that you block a ditch up, where does the water go? And we're suffering with that right now. So who ultimately, once the maintenance contract has expired, who is going to be responsible for those ditches? Is it going to come back to Fylde?
No, it wouldn't, Councillor. The typical arrangement is that a planning condition will be put in place to ensure that the drainage arrangements that are implemented are then maintained, and the requirements for that maintenance would typically go on, a site like this would go on to a resident management company, who would then, pay a contractor to clear the ditches out. There are other authorities, the Environment Agency and the Lead Local Flood Authority, who are responsible for making sure that watercourses work as well. So there would be an arrangement of solutions to make sure that, first off, that the ditches are maintained, and secondly, if there are issues, that normal enforcement proceedings take place to ensure that any blockages or other issues are addressed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now this new road, it starts on Cropper Road and it ends on Cropper Road. Am I right in thinking that? Yeah. And a section of Cropper Road is going to be pedestrian only. So where it becomes pedestrian only, there'll be some sort of barriers to stop cars coming through. There'll be something to stop it, yeah. How much of a rat run is that going to become? Simply because it's a small and narrower road anyway, because of the logistics of building it. People park on the side of the road. It doesn't matter. You can give a house 10 parking spaces and you can guarantee somebody will park on the side of the road because they won't pull on the driveway. It's just humans. It's just what we do. What restrictions are there going to be to make sure that there's traffic calming and there's lots of children possibly potentially living on this site? The last thing you want is a car flying through that to get to the other side of the estate where it's got, you know, it's come on at this what I'd call the south end of Cropper Road. Come on there, lives up at the top end. It can't go straight through Cropper Road to get on at the other side. It's got to go all the way through the estate to get to the other side. So are there some plans to put some traffic calming? We can put as many 20-mile-an-hour residential signs up as we want, but in reality, nobody abides by them. So I do think something needs to be on that road to ensure that there is some traffic calming.
So, as I said, Highways have been involved extensively throughout this process. They've assessed the proposal they've found to be acceptable. I think one of the things they have mentioned is that the main road through the site doesn't have very kind of long straight sections. There are bends within the road, so a bend coming in and when leaving out, and then bends within, and they provide natural calming.
Or a better racetrack.
Well, but these issues aren't unique to this site,
Yeah.
and Highways are of the opinion that, for example, calming such as speed bumps or things like that aren't ideal. They can kind of, that's not their preferred approach. They consider that the design of this road is acceptable, and there are kind of technical specialists who
Okay.
advise this. I think with a large housing development, I understand that people have concerns about Highways. It's nothing kind of unique about this development. It's just kind of, you know, one of the realities of development coming forward. One of the things we have done with the parking throughout that main road is that whilst there isn't an over-reliance on kind of concentrated areas of front parking, there is front parking throughout that route, and that helps to some extent manage kind of parking on the street. Ultimately, Highways have looked, they consider that there's enough kind of natural calming within the design of the road.
Okay.
I'm just going to come in because this is an interesting area, isn't it? Discussion in terms of the link road going through a residential area. There are concerns about that. And I'm just wondering whether there's evidence to suggest, because normally you say that this would be a road that would be much wider, and this is actually narrower. Now, there are benefits and disbenefits to that, aren't there? Because in a sense, am I right in saying that with narrower roads and fewer straight areas, that tends to reduce the speed of traffic, whereas, you know, our experience on wider roads is you can get a greater sense that you can speed and not be aware of it. Whereas on narrower roads, it sort of confines the speed, confines the way that you actually drive. I don't know, but is that one of the modelling sort of things that they've looked at?
Yeah, if I can help, if
Yeah.
I can help on that, yeah, you're exactly right, Chairman. The situation at present with Cropper Road is it's a straight road. You can see the full length of it virtually, and it would be attractive to speeding. So there's been efforts put in terms of give way features, and obviously the deterioration of the road has acted as a natural speed deterrent in the current situation. The way that the proposal here is to create a diversion from Cropper Road, but it's one that's designed to be bendy through the site, so that whilst it's wide enough to allow bus penetration into the site, it's not so wide that you will get that speeding opportunities. And then when you've got you will inevitably have the roadside parking that you refer to. That also acts as a speed deterrent because people have to give way as they pass cars and the buses coming the other way and that kind of situation. So that's one of the reasons why in this presentation John said there'd been extensive discussions with the highway, because a lot of those have focused on the design of that road, where properties front onto it, how landscaping will be introduced, and how that's going to work. So with the Highway Authority been involved in designing this road and redesigning it again to get to the point that we're currently at. I think we have to accept that, you know, they've taken account of, you know, of the speeding traffic concerns.
I just not buy a house in that top corner because otherwise you've got to go all the way through it. But that's a buyer's decision, isn't it? Okay, and sorry, last one. The biodiversity net gain, is it going to be on this site?
Yes. Yes.
The 100% of it is going on this site.
Yeah, those figures are for the site. There's no element of the proposal that's for off-site contribution.
Right, thank you. Right, that's me done.
Thank you. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. So, and thank you for a really, really good presentation. I had 5 or 6 questions that were all answered in it. It was really, really good and really detailed. Thank you. So what we're looking at essentially is a site that's been designated for housing, a site that we've already granted permission for, was it 350 before the previous application on? We've got no objections from any of the statutory consultees, from highways, from the flooding agencies, from any of those. We've got biodiversity gain. We've got 100 affordable homes, 30 adaptable. There's issues with the linkage, but one of the conditions there is that you guys sort that out, and I'm sure it can be. It sounds like it's on the way, and I hope it would be. I'm worried about us being battered for non-determination if we don't decide on it. So I think overall, I understand, you know, the first speaker there said he wants to see it all brought and not piecemeal, but the nature of the site is it's all owned by different people, and I think it needs to get a move on, Chair. I'm happy to support this. So, but thank you for a really comprehensive chat through. I will recommend approval.
So we've got a recommendation for approval there. Councillor, but we'll continue with the debate. Councillor Pittman and then Councillor Farrington.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I thought the presentation was very comprehensive and that did help. And what I'm going to mention is basically has been touched on by Councillor Nixon in terms of ditches. In many ways, I'm pleased there's so much green open space. I'm just not quite sure how safe these attenuation basins and the ditches are going to be. Obviously, gardens have fences, and in terms of children accessing these areas, which arguably are going to be, you know, a good place for hide and seek and whatever. How safe are they going to be? I'm not 100% certain, because it's not going to be flat, is it? It's going to be quite undulating and not necessarily easy to navigate. And let's face it, it's not going to, you know, the grass is not going to be cut. It's going to be quite rough, isn't it? But the levels worry me in terms of children. And I can't see where the play area is going to be. I mean, it's quite a big area, and there's only one play area, isn't there? As far as I could see. There's not one in both halves of this sort of unit. Or has it not been put onto this side?
Yes, so I'll just start with so in terms of the play area, the main local equipped area of play is in this area here. So it's worth noting that part of the wider allocated site includes this land. There's an application for housing that's likely to come, be ready for determination very soon. And then obviously the site's here. So it's finding a place that's kind of central for the wider site. There were mentioned four trim trails. So one of those is up at this end here. So that's the more informal area for play and kind of exercise, I guess. And they're throughout the site. I know that one is there. There's one here somewhere. The other two, forgive me, I can't off the top of my head remember exactly where they are. But they're distributed kind of evenly throughout the site, the trim trails. In terms of safety, so the application, obviously they'll have to secure separately building regs approval. That will look in more detail at certain things like levels changes and you know, steps and slopes and things like that in terms of suitability. In terms of the information that we've seen, there's nothing in terms of the levels and what they're showing that has given us any cause for concern. There's nothing that seems undeliverable about their strategy. I think the idea of having footpaths and cycle paths with planting through the areas of open space is actually quite an attractive one. I don't think it's possible to completely sterilise any design to make it completely kind of safe or free from risk. But at the same time, there isn't anything particular about these proposals that kind of stands out as a particularly unsafe feature. I mean, we don't have a policy specifically about this, but generally when we're looking for good design, it's looking for spaces that are attractive for people. And that means, for example, for children, that it's places where they'll enjoy to kind of play and neighbourhoods that they'll enjoy to live in. And I do think a feature of that is having areas that they can move about in and areas of open space. So, yeah, but ultimately, in terms of that risk factor, I guess that just comes down to, it's more of a subjective assessment. But there isn't anything that is kind of concerning about the proposals. Did you want?
You recommend within the project that those ditched areas are planted up with really spiky bushes so the kids don't go there? Could that be, you know, the planting around it is acknowledged to be not child friendly, so kids stay away from those ditched areas? We've done that sailing, and the kids do not go anywhere near the ditches because they know they'll get stuck.
I think that's something that I couldn't say now that we could definitely commit to, because it would have to be something that was considered in conjunction with the relevant consultees. So, for example, the Environment Agency will have comments about planting adjacent to ditches and what is or isn't suitable. We also have to consider what can be maintained properly so that it doesn't become very overgrown. It's certainly something that we can ask to be considered, but it's not something that we would be able to make a commitment to at this point.
I think you make a good point, though, and I think, you know, when you look at landscaping aspects, it's something that could be factored in and ask the question in terms of, you know, what could be provided. I think it's a reasonable point that we ought to take into account.
If I may, just for 1 second, Chairman, I think I completely agree. I think that's a very good point. And if we do go with the recommendation to delegate to the head of planning with input from the chairman himself, it's certainly a point that I'd be more than happy to take forward on your behalf of that.
It's okay.
Back to Councillor Pittman.
Thank you. I do think it's a disadvantage that these play areas are rather remote from where the bulk of the housing seems to be. It seems to that basically the road's going to be the best place to kick the ball around because they're not, these areas are sort of too peripheral. I would hope that the area that is the bridge between the two parts, that does have some area for play, because to me it is a disadvantage of this development that you're not taking account of children's needs to get out and find somewhere, and to be quite honest, even though it looks green on the periphery, you're not going to be able to get out from your back garden because your back garden doesn't have a gate onto the green area. So you're going to be walking round to get to those areas of green space. So I'm not 100% impressed by that. But I suppose it's the best you can do. And certainly the biodiversity is an advantage in terms of, yes, it's not all houses right to the boundary fence. And I would second Councillor Dixon in terms of approval for this.
And to pick up your point as well, Councillor Pittman, I suppose that this is where there are sort of benefits and disbenefits again, is that we're being told that, okay, notwithstanding some of your concerns that you've just expressed, that we're getting twice the amount of open space that you would normally get with a development of this kind. Now, open space as well is great for children to be able to utilise for free play, etc., and do whatever they're doing. So I suppose, although you're looking at the more formal sense of a play scheme and things like that, the open space in itself would be beneficial, I think, to residential amenity and to young people being able to get out and do outside activities, etc.
I think we also need to factor in the degree of parental responsibility and neighbourhood peer pressure on the behaviour of children, and if it's clear from the off that these are the areas, even if they're slightly remote, I'm sure that as a community people work together and ensure that the children play in those areas.
But they're good points, and thank you for raising them. They are, yeah.
Chair. I thought we were on questions as the debate started, because
Well, it's an extra question, and then if somebody wants to propose,
right, yeah.
that's why.
But there's not been any debate, and it's already been proposed and seconded.
Yes.
I think it was sort of the protocol that we enter the chamber with an open mind, with no predetermination, and nobody's been given any opportunity to speak against it. Yet
And
it's
that's
been
why
proposed and seconded.
That's why we're continuing with the debate now, for opportunities to do just that, Councillor Collins.
Do you want me to add your name to the list, Councillor Collins?
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Farrington.
Thank you. I just also commend the officers for a lot of hard work here, you can tell in the document. Just the devil's always in the detail on these things, and Officer Stow mentioned about the upkeep, leading on from another question of the ditches, because this is going to be important. You can see other local examples where that's not happened, and we've got major issues like Ligard Brook. For that to happen, there would have to be a maintenance service charge payable and a maintenance company. You've also got 4 different house builders potentially might have 4 different maintenance companies, and how would there be uniformity? For example, you wouldn't expect to move into a house and be paying £60 a month maintenance charge, and then find out that the guy across the road is paying 30 because he's on a different house building strip. So can you guarantee that this is definitely going to happen? There will be a maintenance charge. Part of that will be allocated to keep the water and the ditches free, and that there will be some kind of joined up thinking there, please.
Yeah, Councillor, it is a standard approach with residential developments like this, that we would impose a planning condition that required details of not just the maintenance of the landscaping in terms of how it's maintained, so how regularly it's cut and that kind of thing, but the arrangements that arrangements are put in place to ensure that happens, and it covers the wider range of things that you're talking about, and Councillor Nixon talked about in terms of it's not just cutting the grass, it's making sure that the ditches are clear, it's making sure that any pumping stations are operational, it's making sure that any trim trails that go through areas that aren't adopted highway have their surfaces maintained, have any lighting repaired. So it would cover all that element of the ongoing operation, if you will, of the development once it's complete and occupied. So whether that approach will be standard amongst all, not just the sites here, the sites in and anywhere else in the borough, whether there are variances in charges that are put by different companies to cover that is probably outside of the planning system. But we would be making sure that as a consistent approach to the maintenance is put in place to make sure that it's all done to the same standard, and that there isn't an issue where one property or one part of the wider development is doing X, and the other part of the wider development is only doing half of X.
Thank you. And just one little follow on from the question still on the subject of ditches and water flow, really. Assuming these pumping stations are working well, it has to pump the stations into a river that then takes the water out towards the sea. In view of issues we've got further down the line in various places, are we confident that the extra volume that's created from concreting and taking water flow off land into the surrounding infrastructure, that's adequate to actually hold this extra volume flowing through, and we're not just literally pushing the problem down the line, as it were?
That's exactly the reason why this application is here now. When we had an application submitted on the site on 2017, there's been a change in the flood risk. We heard the first speaker today talk about, his need to use wellies in his garden, that kind of, all that issue, that is a known issue in the area, and there's been a lot of work put into the design of the drainage to make sure that is addressed, and that the outfall in terms of both surface water and foul water, the outfall in terms of surface water from the site is controlled at a rate that reflects what it needs to reflect, to not push the problem further down the stream.
Lower than existing.
Yeah, and so it's including the normal climate change betterment that is built into these calculations.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points, really. Following on from Councillor Farrington's point there, obviously there was a mention of existing flooding in people's properties that are already there, and there is a mention of pumping station on site, and we've seen that in various other developments in the area. We do live in areas of floodplain, so it is a requirement. Just for a point of clarity, if you would, you said that the flood risk has been recalibrated. Just for point of clarity, the area has been deemed as a greater risk of flooding, not a lesser risk of flooding. That's correct, isn't it? Taking a step back, it would have been beneficial, and it's regrettable from my point of view that we weren't, because all these applications have been running for quite a long time. It would have been better for us all, really, if we could have looked at them all on the same day, because it would have given us a much more holistic view of the overall site. And my concern is that in the pursuit of an overall harmonious master plan, that there's going to be elements here that are going to fall between the cracks. And so we're going to pass one thing, or we're going to reject one thing on the basis, and then something's going to come up in a few months' time about one of the other applications. It's fantastic to see so much green areas in this development. It'd be very interesting to see when it's completed whether those green areas are actually all still there, but we'll have to wait and see. One point I would like you to clarify for me as well is that there's a substantial amount of affordable housing, 30% I think it says in the report, which is great. Am I to believe that affordable housing is dispersed through the entire development? Because obviously there would be a concern that if we suddenly get bulking on the edges of this developer's land, and then the next development opportunity comes in and they've got affordable housing, and again that we get little pockets rather than it just being dispersed through the whole development. So the question is it dispersed and the housing is of all different levels throughout the development?
So the answer to that's very straightforward. It is dispersed throughout the site. So the submitted affordable housing statement actually gives the plot numbers where the different types of affordable housing will be, and they show that it's right throughout the entirety of the site. So yes, it is dispersed. In terms of the first comment about open space, I'm not sure if it's exactly a question, but there was a suggestion that maybe when it's built out, then there might actually be less green space on site. So perhaps the implication is that there would be amendments to the proposal that might change that. So obviously applicants are entitled to submit to vary their plans. What I would say with this one is that it's highly unlikely that would happen, because the the size and position of the open space has been agreed with the Environment Agency in order to properly manage flood risk issues on the site. So it wouldn't just be a case of kind of addressing general design and layout issues. They would also need to address kind of the Environment Agency. So I cannot foresee a scenario where the amount of open space on this site would be reduced, because it is so essential for the suitability in terms of properly managing water on site.
Okay, and one final point, if you'd indulge me, Chair. The access road, as it's shown on there, and I know that Wayne Holmes recommended that they would be open to putting 2 access roads in, which may help with some of the traffic moving through the overall development. But is there any agreement with the applicant of this parcel of land which we haven't considered today? Because as I understand it, they are speaking against this application, but the proposed access road runs right the way through their land. So how do you square that circle?
Yes, so just to clarify then, so we're talking about this strip of land here, and you're correct, the agent for that site spoke against the application today, and they did voice that they mentioned in particular that road and saying that the position hadn't been agreed, and they gave their opinion that to approve this application wouldn't be appropriate for that reason. Officer's advice is that the plans that we have from both applicants as existing, the points of connection are very close to each other. So they're not that far off at all. They're within less than a metre of each other. There is an issue with most likely with the alignment. So we've discussed this with Highways, who have considered a number of different scenarios in terms of how that issue could be resolved. The most likely one is that there will be changes made to the alignment of the road so that it does connect up in the areas that both applicants are showing at the moment. There are a number of other options. Highways are comfortable that the general principle of what's been shown is fine. You are correct that in an ideal world we would have all applications at the same time. And that's not the situation we're in. So a large part of the effort that officers are putting in is to make sure issues such as these can be suitably addressed. That's why the recommendation is for deferral with, and then this is one of the matters that's mentioned, delegation, to let us address that point. If it can't be addressed, then that recommendation can't be satisfied. Or if significant changes need to be made, the head of planning, the chair and the vice chair would advise on that, and it would be the case that the application may have to come back. However, I think there is a good prospect of things being addressed within the recommendations.
So finally, Chair, could we put in an amendment there that would say that if the powers are delegated to iron out these concerns, if there was a stage where there was an impasse of the road, that then could come back to committee for further consideration?
I understand Councillor Evans' point, but I think that's probably covered anyway, because resolution point 1 talks about consideration, including revisions of the layout to address concerns and also linkages with the adjacent development sites. So that is specifically in there, because that is specifically the point that Mr. Williams raised earlier, and it's a known issue that John and others are working on trying to get that particular crease ironed out.
I want to pick up your point as well, because it was a concern for me when I was looking at the scheme in terms of affordable housing. I think the technical term for it being dispersed and spread is pepper potting. I remember reading about that, but you sometimes do get schemes where the affordable housing is put as a discrete area, almost as if they're very different, and that can bring stigma and all sorts of associations that we don't want to really go into. So I think it is good that it is dispersed, and it was a good question, so thank you for raising it. And we're getting some really good questions, and actually if it came to delegated authority, those questions are important that they're raised for me and the vice chair to be able to follow through with those and see where we go. So very good so far, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, but I share a lot of Councillor Evans' concerns about not having a master plan. Yeah, it is unlikely that all four developers had come with applications all at the same time, but I would have been a lot happier had there been a master plan of the overall site. We didn't have a master plan at Mill Farm, and we've ended up with a dog's dinner with a situation where Lancashire County Council aren't happy with the access arrangements. We've got serious concerns about the road safety. There's inadequate car parking on the site, and a capacity for the stadium has been agreed that is far above that at which car parking problems.
You know what I'm going to
occur.
say, Councillor Collins? This is the application that we're
Yeah, but
determining.
I'm just
and
making
please-
an overall point.
Yes, okay.
So
But- so you've made it. So
Yeah,
can we
okay,
go back
I
to
just
this
say-
application?
Can I just say, Chairman, we have an application here from 2017, so that this land has been allocated a long time. We've known about that area for a long time. There has been time to develop a master plan. I know officers have other work and whatever, but I would have been a lot happier had there been a master plan for this before it came before the committee today. And would have been a lot happier if the committee was making the decision without delegating to officers. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Griffiths.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I do have concerns, obviously, about the water, because this is moss. This was always a moss land, historically grazing horses, because it was good for nothing else. My concern is, we've stated that these houses won't flood, but what about the older properties surrounding it? How do we guarantee they will be safe? And also, I do feel that the master plan is needed, and I'm not really happy about delegating that. And on your 106s, you've got a bus service for St Anne's and Blackpool, but most of what you're putting your money towards is up at Wesham and Kirkham. Will the bus that runs through be going through this site as well? You know, is it 78 or the 76? Or will that still be doing its usual route? Because the people that come to live here won't be able to get to Wesham and Kirkham.
I think you've got a couple of questions there. So
Yeah, thank you.
you want to repeat your first question there, Councillor Griffiths, because before we get to
The first
bus-
question was about the flood,
Yes.
being confident that we're not going to impact on the older
Established.
properties,
Yeah.
because if we're going to raise levels and everything, we know what happens.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Yes. So first of all, the question about flood risk, and you mentioned that the site is kind of a lot of moss on site as well. So that's one of the you'll have seen a neighbour comment was received yesterday or the day before. That's in the late observations, and they comment in particular that there's a lot of moss on site. So, but those comments that were received were effectively other comments that had been received from neighbours covered the same matter, so they had been considered. In terms of flood risk for other houses around the site, so one of the conclusions of the technical modelling is that there will be no increase in flood risk for any land off the site either, and that's an important requirement. So the modelling shows that. So the drainage proposals are considered to be suitable for achieving that, and that's in consultation with the lead local flood authority, United Utilities, Environment Agency. So people who are the statutory consultees for these considerations.
So the 1 in 100-year event that may occur,
Yeah.
will they still be safe in that?
Yeah, so that's what the open space / attenuation land is
Right.
for. So that's for in that very rare event, but when it does happen, that land, there are basins that
It will
will
hold.
hold that water so that it doesn't have that effect.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
that's what it's for. So this development does actually provide an opportunity to better manage flood risk on site, because the flood risk was reassessed and seen to be higher. And at the moment, most of the site is vacant. This development will enable a strategy to be delivered where there's active management of water on site and water that would move off site as well. In terms of the bus, so the proposal is that it would be a new bus service. It would run through the site, and it would connect St Anne's with Blackpool. So that's my understanding. So it would be a new service that would run through the site. And in terms of the master planning, I think it's important to clarify that a master plan document has been provided by the applicant for this site. It has sign up from the agents for the development for the two applications that have been subject to a recent appeal. This application site here, it doesn't have it from this site here. So we're in a situation where there is a master plan document that officers consider to be acceptable. One of the adjacent landowners doesn't. You've heard that discussion today. So I agree with you, in an ideal world, things perhaps would have come forward differently, but this is the situation that we're in here, and this is a development for 350 homes on a site that was allocated a few years ago now. In terms of what the local plan envisages in delivery, it is slightly behind. It's seen that the benefits of bringing the site forward are significant, and any concerns about compatibility, officers and highways in particular have been giving that detailed consideration. A lot of our negotiation has been about getting this to a point where we consider there aren't any unknowns that could seriously kind of, result in, I think somebody referred to it as a dog's dinner or something coming forward that wasn't suitable. That's really what a lot of our focus has been about, in ensuring this can come forward now, the other parts of the site can come forward whilst delivering what the local plan envisages for the allocated site in terms of master planning.
No further speakers.
We don't have any further speakers. Are there any more questions or comments, or does anybody want to contribute to the continuing debate? Right, so can I go back to Councillor Dixon? Are you happy with the recommendations as they stand? Because we've had some discussions about the nature of those.
I think so, Chair. I think the one thing that was mentioned was about if the link isn't put right, but I'm happy that that's covered in the recommendation as for officers to agree that. I'm sure if it's not done, it'll come back to us.
Of course.
Right, and you're happy with that, seconder? Okay. So if no more questions and no more debate, could we go for the vote, please? It's been proposed by Councillor Dixon, seconded by Councillor Pittman for approval.
For delegation.
Delegation, yes. Do you want to read out the actual recommendations, and then we're very, very clear? Well, it doesn't matter. Go on.
Okay. So the recommendation that the decision on the application is delegated to the head of planning to be made in consultation with the chairman and vice chairman of the planning committee, with reference to 4 elements to be satisfied. Further consideration of the layout of the proposed development with specific reference to the relationship between the northern edge of the development and the tree cover at Dickies Lane South, and to consider the appropriate coordination and linkages with adjacent development sites, including revisions to layout to address any justifiable concerns. 2, the adoption by the council of the shadow habitat regulation assessment that has been submitted with the application by AirUp Limited, which is dated March 2024 and identified as version 3. 3, the completion of a Section 106 agreement. 4, the drafting of an appropriate schedule of planning conditions and reasons which are considered necessary to secure the delivery of the development in a suitable manner.
Thank you. So We're now going to have a 5-minute comfort break. Thank you very much, members, for that one, and thank you for the members of the public and the speakers that contributed to it. Thank you. Right, members, we'd like to continue, please. So if you can stop your discussions now, thank you. We're going to move on to item 4, which you can find on page 72 of the report. And I think we, on this particular one, we have 2 speakers?
We do, Chairman.
2 speakers, which is why we've changed the order slightly, and we're going to go with this one. Can we just check that they're here? I think they are, aren't they?
Mr. Banks and Mr. Mackenzie.
And Mr. Mackenzie.
Yeah.
Right, you're both here. Okay, right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good to go.
Yes, okay, over to you, Andrew.
Okay, this application relates to a property called Tunstead Farm, which is on Greenhouse Lane in Greenhouse. So the plan in the screen, I'll put my lens up front. The plan on the screen, got the M55 coming across the borough, Fleetwood Road going north, so we're to the west of Fleetwood Road. If you know where the Starbucks site is, just on Fleetwood Road, we're near there. So the Starbucks is here, Fleetwood Road goes north, Greenhouse Lane comes across from Fleetwood Road, and the application site is generally the farm within the wavy blue line. The application building is that within the red line. So that's, you can see from the excuse me, you can see from the image there, it's a rural, it's in the countryside, it's a rural area. Generally agricultural uses around the site, obviously a number of dwellings and diversification from agricultural uses in some cases. Sorry. Okay, so like I say, in Greenhouse, countryside. The application in front of us is for a change of use of one of the agricultural buildings on that farm to a use for storage purposes, and that includes the filling in of the walls to provide a secure building. So it's an open fronted building. I've got some pictures to show you in a second. It creates 10 units, with 9 of them being in a terrace, which are 10 metres by 6 metres each. So relatively small storage units. The 10th unit is just slightly larger than that. The parish council have objected to the application on the basis of there being other storage uses in the area. They've got concerns over the noise that could be generated by the development, and they've got concerns over the impact on the highways from the size and volume of vehicles that will be associated with the use. Notwithstanding that, the officer recommendation is to grant planning permission, and that's why we're at committee today. So before I break for the speakers, this is the building in question. So if you recall the aerial image, it's this building here. This line shows the access route which comes through the farm and joins Greenhouse Lane at an existing access point, which is the main access to the farm. As I said, the buildings in question, there's a terrace of 9 units being formed, and then this slightly larger and certainly a different shape unit, which is a slightly smaller, lower height on the end. And at that point, I'll break for the speakers, Chairman.
Thank you, Andrew. Over to Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. We have, as previously determined 2 speakers on this, who I'll invite in order. Just before I do, just to confirm, each speaker will have the same amount of time for fairness, and that will be 3 minutes. I'll give you a call 15 seconds before, just to sort of bring it to a conclusion if necessary. So without further ado then, Mr. Luke Banks, who I believe is speaking on behalf of Mr. Walter Holloway this morning. Mr. Banks. The microphone is on, so in your own time, 3 minutes.
I don't think you're allowed to do that. So put it back in, please.
I have the minutes of
The clock when you're ready to speak.
Okay, yeah. Right, so I have been instructed by Mr. Walter Holloway to raise concerns on his behalf in relation to the proposed change of use at Tunsteads. Whilst it is acknowledged that the change of use in itself is compliant with planning policy, the associated activities at the site are not. A development being policy compliant does not necessarily mean that an application should be approved. Firstly, I would like to draw attention to the Class R application and in particular comments made by Lancashire County Council in relation to the highway impact. To summarise these comments, LCC stated that the proposed change of use would further exacerbate damage to the highway verges. They concluded that a Section 278 agreement would be required to install passing places on Greenhouse Lane. This Class R application was subsequently withdrawn. The application was resubmitted under full planning, hence the reason we are here today. LCC subsequently retracted the requirement for passing places due to it not meeting all 6 of the requirements for a planning condition. It is not necessary, yet the photographs provided, although have not been in this case, seem to suggest otherwise, nor is it deemed reasonable given the nature of the development, should the cost of these passing places prejudice highway safety. Self-storage units now exist at a number of sites on Greenhouse Lane, all of which were not considered to have a significant effect on highway safety, at which point does highway safety become a concern. Turning to the proposed conditions to be attached to any planning consent, in relation to condition 4, Mr. Holloway considers that a request for insulated roller shutter doors is very reasonable, considering that this is a requirement of building control for development of this commercial nature. Mr. Holloway operates a former Tranquil holiday park directly adjacent to the application site. This has already been impacted by the plant and machinery movements from Tunsteads, many of these movements occurring outside of the proposed operating hours 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We contend that the proposed operating hours contained at condition 6 are excessive when considering the impact of the amenity on the 2 nearby holiday parks, Sharrowland and Jolna. Whilst condition 7 is appreciated and the condition prohibits the storage of plant and machinery in external areas, this must also extend to internal areas. It must be noted that the storage of plant and machinery does not constitute a use class B8 storage and distribution, but is in fact sui generis. The storage of plant and machinery is therefore not compliant with a change of use to B8. In summary, it is considered that the applicant should not have any issues in accepting the proposed amendments to the conditions if this is indeed a genuine B8 use. We hope that the above points will be addressed prior to making a decision. Thank you for listening. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Banks. Now if I could call on Mr. Rob Mackenzie, who's the agent for this item. Good morning. The same parameters for you, so microphone ready for you to go. So you're over the time.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, all. I speak today on behalf of the applicants, Mr. and Mrs. Sutcliffe, owners of Tunsteads Farm Greenhouse, in support of the change of use of an agricultural building. The application is being heard today due to an objection from the local parish council, and on reflection of this objection accepts the need for rural diversification, a use supported by the local plan. Concerns are raised in respect to the impact the proposal could have on the local road network. The applicant has worked tirelessly with LCC and the local council to ensure that these concerns have been mitigated, and it noted that the Highways Department have now removed their objection and have not objected to the proposal. The objection further states that the proposal could impact local residents, something which is further mirrored in an objection from a neighbour, Mr Holloway. The case officer has considered both objections very carefully and set out concisely why the application should be approved today, subject to conditions. The Fire Local Plan supports sustainable growth and expansion of all businesses where this is in accordance with other policies on the local plan. The site at Tunsteads is a former farmstead which the applicants recently purchased and propose to diversify part of the farm in the form of converting an existing building. The building is of a permanent and substantial construction with minimal changes to its external appearance required. The visual effects arising from the external changes to the building can be mitigated through the imposition of an appropriate condition to secure a sympathetic finish, noted within the conditions. Concern is further raised within the objection the potential for the increased traffic movements and the lack of on-site parking. The application provides the provision of up to 6 vehicles located to the east of the building, includes the resurfacing of the existing access onto Greenhouse Lane, and includes the formation of 2 passing places on the existing track. Officers are satisfied that the volume and nature of the vehicle movements associated with storage use proposed can be accommodated on the surrounding highway network and within the site without detrimental impact to highway safety. A number of points raised within the objection have been noted. Firstly, the case officer and the applicants clearly state that the storage use proposed can be undertaken without undue detriment to the amenity of neighbouring occupiers or users, and so satisfies the requirements of policy GD7 and the MPPF in that regard. The exterior of the building will remain in essence unchanged, with the proposed changes to the front elevations in the form of roller shutter doors, which a condition is proposed to detail the colour. The proposal allows the site to be repurposed in a sustainable way without creating harm to visual amenity of the area or the amenity of neighbouring occupiers. Suitable provisions for access and parking have also been secured to ensure that the development has no unacceptable impact on highway safety and its effect on the network. Overall, in terms of merits of the application, the case officer has stated that they are happy in terms of the application being compliant with the MPPF and local policy, and it is respectfully requested that members approve this application in line with their planning officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Mr Mackenzie. Thank you to both speakers for their input. I'll now hand back to the chairman.
Thank you very much, 2 speakers for that. Thank you, Vice Chair. So we go back to you now.
Thank you, Chairman.
Continue with the presentation.
Thank you. Okay, so just a reminder of where we are. This is a different aerial image, the other way around, unfortunately, but it perhaps shows the relationships a little bit easier. So this is Greenhouse Lane, south to north on this. The access point from Greenhouse Lane is here. There's a farm surface track that loops round, and then it comes into the farmyard area, and you can see the building in question here, which is on the site boundary, I understand, with the first speaker's client's land. So we talked about Holiday Park. So you can see here is there's a caravan site here, and there's also planning permission to build a bungalow-style holiday lodge in this on this paddock area here. So other than those holiday uses, the other uses around the site are immediately around the site are agricultural, as you can see. This is the building in question. So the main part of the building is this element here, which is to be divided into 9 storage units in line with the steel frame posts that you see there, with the sides filled in and then doors fitted on the front. This is the 10th unit, which was a different shape. This is looking at it from the other way. So you can see this hedge boundary is the hedge boundary with this agricultural field behind. So that photograph's taken from somewhere here. And then you can see the other agricultural buildings. Internally, typical agricultural building with with blockwork walls and timber cladding above. This is some views from Street View actually, which show the access. So you can see Greenhouse Lane, typical narrow or relatively narrow road where two cars would be able to pass, but larger agricultural or other vehicles would need a little bit of negotiation. This is the access point here. Looking the other way, this is the access point that then leads to this farm track, which comes across the fields and I referred to you in my earlier photographs. So the main points are all on this slide. So the site's in the local plan, the site's in the countryside. New development is limited in countryside areas, but there are exceptions to that. Exception A supports rural businesses. So with this being a commercial use, you could argue that exception A applies. And element B, which relates to the reuse of permanent buildings, subject to other considerations, definitely does apply, because this is a permanent building that's having its use changed with some modifications to it. The first speaker referred to an earlier application, which was what they call a Class R application. That's listed in the planning history. That application was withdrawn. The reason for that being that a Class R application allows for the change of use of agricultural buildings, but it doesn't allow for alteration of those buildings. So with the requirement under this scheme for the enclosure of the building, a Class R was just the wrong process. So that's why that application was withdrawn, and the planning application that we now have was submitted because that's the correct process. So moving from that point, looking at the sort of visual impact of the building, there's no change to its size. It's the same building. It's just having some relatively minor alterations made with the front elevations being filled in, with condition 4 on the agenda papers there to ensure that the materials used are appropriate and appropriately coloured to reflect its rural surroundings. Turn to the highways point. Yes, the roads around the site are rural and are narrower than other roads as a consequence of that. Those roads are designed and have built up to accommodate farm traffic, and so the opposite view is that the additional traffic generated by a small storage use wouldn't be a concern. I think there have been instances, and the images that perhaps Mr. Banks was hoping to display will show where there have been instances where vehicles have overrun the verges at either side of the road and led to some, wheel damage to those verges. Whether those overruns were a consequence of activity associated with this site or other sites in the area or general farm sites in the area is probably unknown. And as this site isn't operating, clearly they can't be, as this storage use isn't operating, they clearly can't be associated with the subject application here. It's perhaps with that in mind that Lancashire County Council have revisited their assessment of the highway implications of this development compared to how they looked at it when they were consulted on the earlier Class R application, and have concluded that it wouldn't be appropriate for them to request passing places to be installed on Greenhouse Lane. What they have suggested is that passing places be installed in the farm track, and I think that's probably a better solution, because that would deal with the internal traffic in a better way, and it's not necessary to have passing places on a rural lane like Greenhouse Lane. Certainly additional passing places beyond those that informally exist through gate entrances and the like. In terms of neighbour amenity, the application is for a storage use. It's not for any manufacturing or anything else than that. So the idea is to ensure that the level of activity it's not immediately adjacent to residential properties, but it's there are properties in the vicinity. So that's why there's conditions suggested to limit visits to the site for dropping off and collecting products and items that are stored there to more typical daytime hours. The conditions on the agenda paper are relatively standard for this type of application, looking to make sure that the storage is inside the building rather than storage being undertaken outside of the building. Provide elements of parking on site, control the hours, as I've just said, bring in some typical ecological mitigation measures and the access improvements. But with those conditions, the officer recommendation is to grant permission.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to draw attention for members that this sort of application, conditions are always important, but in particular, these sort of applications, that the detail is important. And I hope you've looked at the conditions and feel satisfied or dissatisfied, whatever, in terms of the control of usage of a facility like this. Particularly, I think there's number 6, I think, which is about the restrictions, I think, of usage of machinery outside and external areas, which, you know, can happen in certain circumstances. So the conditions, if you've looked at them, are particularly significant, I think, here in terms of how you judge this particular application. Do we have any questions or any comments? Councillor Evans first. I think Councillor Collins is there, and Councillor Parrington. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I'm all for rural diversification because it's a difficult world out there, and anything that brings in revenue streams is good. One of the concerns I've got is that in condition 6, obviously there's some operational times that are put in place there. I'm a little concerned that on the Sundays and bank holiday time, it's still kept at 7 o'clock in the morning that people can start accessing the site, although it's curtailed at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You know, with there being a holiday facility next door to the site, I'm just wondering whether or not a 7 o'clock start in the morning is the right sort of time that's being placed on it. That may well be that there's only certain sort of parameters that you can put on that, but I'd like some clarification on that one realistically.
Should we put that before we...
Please, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no particular reason why that time was chosen. Quite often, I must admit, we do impose a restriction of between 8 and 6. Here, with it being a storage use and in a rural location where, you know, typically farm activities in summer can begin relatively early, I think we extended it in recognition of that. But there would be, if committee's will was to impose a tighter restriction, then that's an option that's open to you.
Yeah, I mean, quite often in these rural settings, you get people like tree surgeons and sort of agricultural workers that utilise these storage units rather than what you would see in a traditional city storage unit where people are using it as an extension of storage for the house. So that is my concern realistically. I would be more inclined to support it if there was a 9 o'clock start on a Sunday. But no further questions, Chair. Thank you.
We have a proposal, but, you know, are you putting that forward as a possible amendment then, that 9 o'clock on
Yeah, if you could put that in as an amendment, I'd be happy to support the application.
Yeah, okay. So that's something to bear in mind when we come to, if anybody wants to actually sort of put it forward for approval. Councillor Collins.
The roller shutters, what's the height of those?
Well, the overall building to the eaves is 4 metres. So between ground level and this eaves point here is 4 metres. So the roller shutters are going to be if that's a 2 metre, just over a 2 metre door, that roller shutter is going to be at 3 metres.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got points to make, but I was just dealing with questions now, Chair.
You don't have any more questions?
I've no more questions, but I've got
Okay.
other points.
Yeah, but you
to-
can come back in.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you can always do that. That's fine. Councillor Farrington.
Actually, Councillor Evans has asked a question, but I would just make a point attached to that, is that it's just disappointing to hear Speaker One say that the existing conditions aren't being met by the landowner. There's nothing that doesn't have any impact on what our decision today, but just another comment about enforcement. I think that we need to be mindful of in other areas of our council work potentially. Thank you.
Okay, I think you've made a point there. Thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. When we were talking about rural businesses, I mean, this was a rural business that was, I'm assuming it was a farm business, which, yeah, it looks pretty much like it was, doesn't it? Yeah, it still is. Will there be continuing farming work going on the rest of the site?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
There's no other lawful use on that site other than
Okay.
farming.
Right, and it's
So-
all owned by the same family person?
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
I'm not speaking out of turn here, but I do feel as though I've got to speak here.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to allow you to speak because, well, no, I'm going to have to say in the public gallery, we do not allow people to intervene. If I make an exception to you, sir, I would have to make an exception for other people. So I understand the frustration sometimes, but I'm going to have to close you down on that. Right, go back to Councillor Collins, you wanted to say?
Yeah, the previous
Sorry.
owner of the site, the previous occupant was a builder, Harrison's Builders. I don't think it was a farm. So, yeah.
Okay, point of reference.
You know, it wasn't farming use, but,
Yeah. Go back to Councillor Nixon now, because we were in the middle, weren't we?
Right, yeah, well,
Yeah,
we're just
okay.
establishing what
You
it
made a
is,
point.
what it is as at the moment. Is it being used for farming activity? No.
Chairman, my understanding of the site is that there, and from the planning history, there is no lawful use of the site other than for agricultural purposes. The case officers, I've not personally visited this site, but the case officer, when they visited, they noted that there were animals around and what have you. So there is some evidence of agricultural activity.
Okay, thank you.
If there are suggestions that other parts of the site are being used for purposes that are not associated with agriculture, then that's a matter that the planning enforcement team can investigate, and I will speak to them after this meeting
Right.
to make sure that that happens, because clearly that's something that's of concern in the room.
Yeah, which I genuinely didn't know about.
yeah,
I was just, this was part of my question leading up to, I didn't know what, sort of like whether it was somebody new coming in to start changing this, or whether it's all by the same family. That I get it that farming is very, very difficult at this time, and for a lot of farmers, it's costing money to run the business, and so diversity within they're using their buildings for other things, I accept is a possible option for them, and it might be an option that they have to take because otherwise they go under. So that's what I was just wanting to qualify, whether that was the case. Regarding the noise that was mentioned by the first speaker and the caravan park, which is quite close to that, on the red line, where the red line that's at the back there, is there any plans to put some sort of planting to mitigate the sight of a new, well, I know it's the same structure, but make it higher and make it so it could perhaps baffle any noise that's coming?
The bottom right image there is taken behind the building.
Yeah.
So the reason I put this in the presentation was to try and indicate the nature of the existing screening that's there. That's obviously a typical rural
You don't want to
native
be leaving
species
that,
hedge,
yeah.
which will no doubt be managed by the adjoining landowners between them and maintained as a thick hedge. I don't think you would be looking.
No,
to
you
do
wouldn't.
anything
You
on that.
wouldn't gain anything by taking that down and put it. I just wanted to know what was there because it's If it wasn't something suitable there, then put something suitable. Is there any other form of noise mitigation that could be put between the hedge and the building, you know, to prevent. When you're on your holidays in a caravan park, the last thing you want is you know, from a roller shutter on the other field. When it's never been there, if you've been to the same place a couple of times and then somebody comes along, is there anything that?
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about is a storage use. So storage uses are typically the most benign of commercial uses because you know, you take stuff there and you leave it there. That's inherent with the storage. You may well, you know, some people, I mentioned a tree surgeon, may be visiting daily or even a couple of times each day. But I'm not sure that is such an issue that it could justify, you know, certainly refusal of the application or any other measures, given the relationship, you know, that we're talking about here.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Rudd.
I think following on what we were saying before, it's difficult because we're looking at what's put in front of us. We're not looking at the intent of the individual. I think you said, Mr. Snell, that the occupants had recently bought the premises, so it wasn't a long-standing family that we're trying to look at diversification to retain the rest of the farm. And there is a concern in terms of the direction of travel. So I think it does come down, and I agree with Councillor Farrington that time and time again we look at the conditionality, but we also look at the implementation of those conditions and the enforcement of those conditions. So I would sort of gently suggest to officers that we do keep a watchful eye on the intent of this, and we don't want the creepage of sort of this is the first stage of the whole area being redeveloped as something like an industrial estate, because that wouldn't be in keeping with the agricultural nature of the existing site.
And also, could I add that local vigilance is sometimes useful, isn't it? Because officers can't be everywhere doing all this all the time. So there has to be also other people sort of watching this. Reports can then come in. Are there any questions or further points? Councillor Collins, did you want to come in again?
It's the roller shutters, the noise that a roller shutter makes. I had one in my shop, it's just over a normal door size, and when you open it up in the morning, it went and it goes with a bang. Yeah, it really does go with a bang. These roller shutters are a lot bigger. Now we're saying that those buildings are going to be used for storage use. People are going to come, leave the stuff there and go. Well, is there any need for roller shutters? If they're only going in frequently, could they not have traditional hinged carriage doors? You know, the caravan site is immediately, you know, it's just a stone's throw from where this building is. You've got people, you're talking about rural uses. Well, you have caravans in a rural setting, but storage units, they can be anywhere. You know, this is not a suitable use for that site, in my opinion. People come on holiday, they spend money on the caravan, whatever, they spend money in the local area, and this is going to, well, if I paid money and I'd gone there, and 7 o'clock in the morning, bang, bang, a couple of people have come, woke me up on a bank holiday, on a weekend, I wouldn't be too pleased. And we're told that, I think it's the owner of the caravan site has plans for a holiday cottage, even closer to these units. Now, I'm not sure if he's going to go ahead with that. But again, a holiday cottage is a more suitable use in a rural location than this is. Now, if someone's taking it over, and is going to do something that impacts so much on an adjacent, existing, successful business, I'm really not happy about this. And, I don't know if I have grounds for refusal, but if we do, I'll propose refusal of this.
Are you proposing?
I'm proposing refusal of it, yeah. I don't know.
But you propose refusal.
Yeah.
So,
Chairman, can I?
yes.
Yeah, just to perhaps touch on Councillor Collins's point there. Firstly, as a point of clarity, I think I mentioned in the presentation earlier, there is planning permission for the building of a bungalow in this location, which would be used as a holiday let cottage. So the location in question is this paddock here. In terms of the noise activity, we seek consultation comments from the Highway Authority on highway safety. We've also sought comments from the Council's Environmental Protection team, who would look at noise disturbance as part of their remit, and they've offered no objections to this no observations, I think they recorded. So, but certainly they've not raised objection to the application, mindful of the use proposed and the location. We heard comment from Councillor Evans earlier about the timings of some of the activity taking place. I wonder whether that, if there are committee concerns about the activity and the disturbance to neighbouring properties, whether planning conditions are designed to try and help control development, that may be a more appropriate way should committee have concerns on that basis.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, Chairman, I just think we just need to be careful here with what we're doing. It was, I think, less than 2 years ago, not probably a quarter of a mile from this place, we turned down a site for caravanning and camping because this committee decided that it was inappropriate in the countryside. And now we've got a campsite up there that's being used and people saying, oh, well, that should be in the countryside. And this is next to an industrial site, which could be a farm. It could have combine harvesters going out, and they go out when the time is right, regardless of the time. That's what farms do and how farms work. Whether it's working like that or not now, it could revert to that use and have that noise there. It could have farm machinery, it could have herds of cows, and there'd be nothing that could be done. So I just think we need to be really careful if refusal is gone for, or it doesn't look like it now, that we can defend ourselves on that.
Okay, so thank you for that point. No more comments or contributions? Councillor Pittman. Yeah.
I would go along with Councillor Evans in terms of Sunday bank holiday.
9 o'clock.
Yes, because I think Sundays are special, and I don't think 7 o'clock in the morning is in order.
Councillor Collins, you had your hand up first.
I'm happy to let Councillor Griffiths go.
Okay, all right. Councillor Griffiths.
Yeah, I would support the later start, but the speaker actually mentioned insulated roller shutters. Do they make a difference? Does anybody know, to a noise impact?
That's a good question.
I don't know.
I agree. No, I don't.
Yeah.
There clearly is a concern here, and either through condition, whatever, and through the environment and health people, we've got to make sure that there isn't serious noise damage here in terms of the amenity of the area, particularly with the campsite next door. So is this something we can condition in terms of, those shutter blinds, that they are maintained? Because I suspect, Councillor Collins, that there are shutter blinds, and it's the way they're looked after and maintained. Sometimes I've come across them myself, and some are a little bit easier and smoother, and others are rattling like mad and are really annoying. So I think if we could look at that in terms of conditions, and perhaps look at the possibility of insulation. And then we also, of course, pick up the 9 o'clock. Most people feel nodding on a Sunday morning would be an appropriate condition, or a change to it. I think it's a sufficient
Condition, yeah, to assist you, condition 4 requires that the shutters are implemented. It's simply requiring that the shutters that are implemented in accordance with the design shown on this plan. And then that they are coloured, whatever colour, a grey, brown or green, to give it a rural appearance. I mean, it is possible to revise condition 4 or submit an alternative version of condition 4 that required full details of the shutters to be submitted prior to their fitting, which included details of opening style, colour, levels of insulation, that kind of thing. So an alternative condition of that nature could be worded and imposed if that was committee's wish.
I personally would support that, and it might allay some of the concerns that the committee are expressing. And because I think it's a valid point that Councillor Collins made, sometimes with shutter blinds, they're horrendous. I've also come across some that are very well maintained and they're quite smooth coming down, don't rattle around as much. Councillor Collins.
Yes, Chair. When you look at what it is proposed to be stored here, you've got storage of caravans, cars, surplus stock for sole traders, household items, office furniture, seasonal equipment. When you think about the operating times, if anybody had something stored there and they wanted it earlier than the allowed times, they'd have to pick it up the day before. You know, there's no problem with that. If they wanted the caravan, and if it was 9 o'clock and they wanted to be away at 7 o'clock, they'd have to pick up the caravan the day before. I don't think there's any problem with that. So I'd go further than what's been suggested already. I'd say 10 o'clock, weekends and bank holidays, and I'd say 9 o'clock, Monday to Friday. I think that's reasonable. And if anybody wanted anything outside those times, they'll have to go the day before.
Okay. You've heard your proposal. Is there any support for that, or are we happy with the 9 o'clock on a Sunday? No, no, but what he's proposing is a change of conditions there. Doesn't seem to be a lot of support for that. Okay. President,
I would just
put your pencil up.
Sorry, Chair. I was just, because I'm reading the conditions there. I would just put, maybe Andrew, it would help if you put the in condition 4. Certain attention should be paid to the implementation of the roller doors, with the inference that noise reduction is a key part.
I'm with you on that. I think we should make a specific reference to the concern that we have about possible noise
pollution, because we've made a reference of the colour scheme. Which I think it would be appropriate to make reference to the noise pollution as well, or the impact. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Farrington.
Just following up on that and helping the wording, I think you could put something like soft close, because some shutters have very little resistance down the edge. So if you let go of them, they just fall and you get the bang. Good shutter design is where there's resistance down the edges, so gravity doesn't take over. So there are shutters that do exist. If we could look up and specify the correct technical terminology for those, then we can put that in. Okay.
I agree, but I think also by flagging up our concerns about noise, that when you're implementing and purchasing these things, they are quiet and they are sort of not the rattling, noisy ones, if at all possible, to allay some of our concerns.
Chairman, from what I've heard in the room, there's been suggestions made to revise 2 conditions. Firstly, condition 6, to amend the timings on Sundays and bank holidays from 7 a.m. till 9 a.m. And then a revision of condition 4 to change its focus from, rather than implementing the shutters and painting them a suitable colour, it would be to widen it to require that details of the shutter, the shutters are provided, and that those details include the material of construction, their opening styles, which would cover Councillor Farrington's point, potential for insulation, and their colour. And the reason for that change would be to ensure that the doors have a suitable appearance, provide suitable security, and offer acoustic protection to the wider area.
Okay.
So if I frame a condition along that it would be possible to frame a condition along those lines.
Are we looking for anybody to?
Councillor Nixon wanted to come in.
Yes, Councillor Nixon.
Sorry, it was just the business purposes at this 7 till 1, I wanted clarifying what we was up to, which Andrew's just done that, that's fine, but I just feel, because the 7 till 1 was a 6-hour period, and we're taking 2 hours away from that, from 9 till 1, would we not be just better doing it 9 till 4, like the shops open, and keeping the 6-hour period that they've requested, but just at a different time?
Well, there's a proposal, isn't
Yeah,
there?
yeah.
So you're looking at 9 to
Till
4.
4, yeah.
Okay. What do people think? Yeah, they think that's reasonable? Okay. Andrew?
I can only point out the technical point that that's 7 hours rather than 6.
9 to 3. Okay, 9 to 3. Yeah, go with that.
Apologies.
Do we have anybody that on that basis, and we'll go through this again, that's willing to propose approval of this? Councillor Farrington, Councillor Evans with his hand up, seconding. Before we go through with the vote, it might be good for you just to summarise what we've agreed to change.
Okay. So condition
Good luck.
condition 4. So it's approved, recommended for approval as agenda. Other than condition 4 is revised to require that prior to the installation of the doors, full details are submitted to the council for approval of those doors, with the details including their material, their opening style, potential for insulation and their colour, with the reason being widened to ensure that that relates to providing appropriate appearance, security and acoustic protection. And then condition 6 would be revised to change the hours of operations on Sundays and hours of deliveries, collections and loading movements at the site to between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m.
Right. All those in favour.
Do we have a? Yeah, we had a process.
Well, yeah, we had a proposer in Councillor Parrington and Councillor Evans, wasn't it? Secondly. All those in favour, please show. All those against? Any abstentions? Councillor Collins, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
As I'm here, shall I do the enterprise zone one next?
Yes, you can. That's number 4, I think. No, it's not
Number 2.
Number 2, sorry.
Item 2.
Page 41 on your report. Blackpool Airport Enterprise Zone.
Seem to want me to get to that. Oops. As if by not my magic. First off, let's turn that down. Right. Let's do it this way. Right. You remember us saying how good John's presentation was earlier? Right, well, this will be the exact opposite. This
building exactly.
this scheme relates to Blackpool Enterprise Zones, the Blackpool Airport Enterprise Zone. So if we look at the aerial image there on the screen, which I can't really make any bigger, we're looking at this area here. It's which is essentially the end of Division Lane as you go from Queensway to Common Edge Road. So the Blackpool Airport Enterprise Zone has outline planning permission for the connection of a road through.
Sorry,
Do you mind going up to slideshow and putting it on slideshow and on the top and then clicking it?
Thank you. Right, thank you. So the site is part of a wider, there's a larger application site that has the outline planning permission, 13-hectare site. So that's that area, the majority of which is in Blackpool. So Blackpool deal with the elements that are in their borough. We deal with the elements in our borough. And for the development to proceed, they need planning permission from both. The bits that are in this all has outline planning permission. It was granted outline planning permission by Fylde Council 12 months or so ago, and outline planning permission from Blackpool Council 12 months ago. What we're looking at here is the reserved matters of that. So that's just filling in the detail around the outline. For Blackpool, there are elements of development alongside the road, the knocking down the house and widening the junction at School Road and Common Edge Road. For Fylde, the works are very much more limited because it's some highway works around Division Lane, and then it's the formation of a detention basin to help with surface water storage, as we talked about at Cropper Road, in this area here. So, the two elements, the roadworks first, those roadworks have been done. There was a separate planning permission that was granted specifically just for those works, and that has been implemented. So the works that you now see in that location are the works covered by the application we're looking at today. They needed to be included in this application because they were part of the outline permission, but just as the phasing of the works on the enterprise zone happened, they needed to get a separate permission, so they did that and then did the works. The detention basin hasn't been done, and that will come later because that's there to assist with as a sort of a final balance between all the elements on the Blackpool side have their own on-site drainage that then filters through to through the surface water system, and then this is like a final sort of final balance before the water is released from the overall site into the brook that then flows south towards the river, the sea. In actual fact, it will look a lot that this is I told you it was a terrible presentation. This isn't actually the site. The site's on the other side of that footpath, but it will look a lot like that, where it's just a lower area that's perhaps a little bit more engineered with head walls and outlets and things like that. But essentially, it will still be a green area. There's all sorts of information with the application about the capacity of that and the hydro break and when it will flood and what the bank profiles will be and all this sort of stuff. But for most part of almost all the time, it will just be a green area of lower land. The application, there's some late observations. There's been some updates in terms of highway comments have now been received. There's some revised plans that have addressed some concerns that the airport had about some of the species originally proposed in this location impacting on their landing systems. Those have been revised. There are some further issues that are almost all resolved, which are also tied up with planning conditions on the outline planning permission. So the officer recommendation is also to delegate the decision to officers in this case, but that's just to make sure that the decision is made consistent with the planning conditions, so that where landscaping schemes are changed, they are changed consistently between the two decisions. It's one that the town council have supported. It's part and parcel of the development in the enterprise zone, which the town council also support. But with the majority of that being in Blackpool, this is really, it's more of a procedural thing that needs to be tidied up just because of the quirk of where the borough boundary is. So on that basis, the recommendation is a favourable one, and it's requested that the decision to determine it is passed through to officers.
Any questions or comments, or Councillor Griffiths?
I'm happy to propose it on the landscaping scheme. Sounds very nice.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Nixon? Got a... Oh, by all means.
Could you just drag that picture up a bit? How far does that enterprise zone come down? Where that red line is, how far does it, oh, right, it comes down there.
Yeah, the end of it is that location. So
How does it correspond with the end of Division Lane? All I'm thinking of, years ago, Division Lane used to be a right cut through, didn't it? Instead of using School Road, Michelin Road, etc. People used to turn off Queensway down Division Lane, fly over. Well, now, at the end of Division Lane, they'll be able to access that new road. So I'm just mindful, would Division Lane become a bit of a rat run again?
sorry,
I think the other end of Division Lane.
Is it? Is it still blocked off?
It was, well, it isn't now, is it?
Oh, is it?
No, that's what I'm saying.
No,
It's
it's
become,
not blocked off now.
Yeah,
Blackpool did block it off at one
yeah.
point.
But how far near Division Lane does this attenuation pond come so that it wouldn't, it would sort of like cover that area, if you will?
the attenuation pond, attenuation basin is in this area here. Sorry, I'll go back to my slideshow. So the attenuation basin is in this area.
Right, so it's on
this area here.
Queensway, isn't it? Yeah, it's
So
further down.
it's between the airport, it's off the end of the runway.
Yeah.
Then you've got the bridle path that comes through here. So it's on the runway side of the bridle path. And then you've got the sweep of land that's between the edge of the airfield and Queensway,
Yeah.
where you've got the employment allocation further south. Division Lane's off here. There's no real interface with Division Lane that way.
Division Lane at all.
Division Lane also goes this way
Right.
and serves the access to the sports fields, which have now been developed. But there's no impact on that, other than that will be the route that's used for construction traffic, rather than coming off Queensway to do it. It'll come down there and down there.
Yeah, but that's a better
to do
route. But what I'm thinking is I thought it was the other side of Division Lane that goes over.
It's the airfield side.
Right,
It's
that's
the
fine.
airfield side.
Are you happy to second that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, questions?
Sorry if this is getting a bit technical, so I don't know if you'll be able to answer this. But now you said that it's down towards the end of the runway. If you're building potentially a nesting site for birds and we're wanting to have commercialisation of the airport in the long term, there's the potential danger of bird strikes in jet engines. So is that all taken care of in there?
That is one of the reasons for the determinant. There's been two elements raised by the airport. One is the potential for the landscaping to impact on the landing systems, and the other is how the activity will be done. The planting will not deter birds, and there is a bird deterrent plan as part of the scheme. That's something that it do this and then do that, and then it's that kind of thing to do. Part of it's planting, part of it's the steepness of the sides, so it doesn't allow wading birds to get in. There's activities like that form part of it, and that's something that is just for kind of final approval, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to defer it, to delegate it, so that we can make sure that that's right.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I look forward to seeing that scarecrow when it's erected. The question is, when is a pond, when is a basin not a basin but a pond? But I imagine the answer is when there's got water in it. If it ties into the previous application that we spent a long time looking at, that those areas were basically runoff, so they were going to be dry the majority of the time, but there's water going to be in them. I'm just wondering, because obviously this area as well is going to be a bone of contention around if and when the Morecambe Bay wind farm comes online. It's going to come online around Blackpool Airport, and it's going to run along the similar kind of lines to the road network that's there. That is there any potential that we could actually pump some water into this area and make it a permanent lake with various different ecological protections on it that would stop the wind farm route being able to come that way?
I refer to my answer to Councillor Farrington about air safety.
Yes,
But
okay.
yeah, you're right. This is very unlikely to hold water for any extended period.
Except if it keeps raining for the next 18 months. But, yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay. So we've got a proposal. Was it Councillor Griffiths? Yes. And Councillor Nixon. So all those in favour, please indicate. Unanimous, thank you. That completes that one. So thank you very much. I think we have now.
Page 52, item 3.
Yeah. Thank you. Item 3. Have a nice break now, Peter. Thank you.
Okay, good. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, we don't have any speakers on this, so it's a straightforward presentation from John, and then straight into any questions and debate. Councillor Collins has removed himself because of the declaration of interest. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. Hello again. So this application 23/0766 to land to the rear of Smithy House, Preston Old Road in Clifton. The red circle on that plan just shows the general area of the site. And here you can see the site location plan. So you can see that the site takes its access from Preston Old Road and extends north of Preston Old Road. And it sits between Preston Old Road and William Pickles Park and playing fields. So this is a hybrid application. That means it's part full and part reserve matters. The full part of the application is for the partial demolition and alterations of the former forge building and existing garage buildings on site, for the creation of a carport, cycle store and refuse store, and the creation of a vehicular access, parking and manoeuvring areas. The reserve matters element, landscaping is the only reserved matter. Outline permission is sought for the erection of 5 1.5-storey bungalows with associated gardens and access, and 4 of those would be 2-bed and 1 would be 1-bed. The site is within the settlement boundary of Clifton. We have had an objection from the parish council. That's on the basis of excessive scale resulting in the overdevelopment of the plot, as well as concerns about highway safety. And 6 neighbour objections have been received, which raise a range of issues, primarily relating to impacts on highway safety, overdevelopment of the plot, and concerns about amenity. So each of those matters will be discussed further in the presentation. The officer recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to conditions. There is one update in the late observation report. It's fairly straightforward. So there are just some changes to the wording of planning conditions. We shared them with the agent, which is standard procedure, and they just pointed out, in all honesty, just an error I made in the drafting. So that's the correction to condition 3 and 6. With regards to condition 10, we did have a neighbour who originally was registered to speak, and following reading the report, they informed us that they no longer wish to speak, but they had one comment about an amendment, a suggested amendment to condition 10, which we consider to be reasonable, which we have added in. Condition 10 is the construction management plan condition, and they just wanted the wording to be changed slightly to ensure that appropriate consideration was given to the other users of the shared access, which provide access to the site. So we've just tweaked the word slightly to reflect that. This plan is probably the easiest way just to show the general layout of the proposed development. So what you can see here is it's actually the first floor level plan, which is why it looks like the roofs have been taken off the buildings, but it's the best one just to show, I think. So the kind of yellow L shape and the grey parts around it, that's effectively the proposed new building, which would be 5 dwellings. You can see to the left of the image, they each have private gardens with a shared garden towards the front here. This kind of pink square is the turning area. And then the grey shaded area to the right is where you've got some of the parking spaces. To the left here is where the previous existing buildings on site to the old forge would be converted for the garage, refuse store, cycle store. And then if you follow this access down, this is the shared access which runs alongside the shop and onto Preston Old Road. It's worth pointing out, which I'll discuss a bit more as well later, is that just kind of partially cut off at the top of this plan to the north would be more retained kind of open space within the site. There are protected trees in that area, but as I said, I'll discuss those more further on. So just some of the key elevation plans proposed, so you can see what's proposed. So the coloured part of the plan is the proposed building, and then the outline parts are existing buildings around. So the proposed design is it's a fairly, what I would consider to be a fairly neutral design. It has quite a simple form, and you can see this kind of 1.5 story form, so the ground floor accommodation and then dormers at the roof level to provide first floor accommodation. You'll notice from the adjacent outlines of existing dwellings that the building is generally lower than the other 2-story buildings in the surrounding area. And again, just as a key view, so that one at the top, if you imagine you were standing on Preston Old Road, looking down the shared access, and then the paler kind of coloured area at the back, that's the what you'd be able to see from the road. And this is just another view from within the site. So if you were on the adjacent Muse development looking towards the site, although there aren't really kind of places where you could achieve that view, but that's generally how the building would appear. Sorry, so we don't have a speaker anymore. So I will refer back to this this slide and this next one just while I'm talking. But the application site this is the shared access, and then this is the old forge building, and this is the area where the buildings would be built, and then the protected trees that would be retained. And that's just a slightly zoomed in version. And again, images just for reference. So that's the shared access running alongside the shop back into the site. You can see the old forge buildings just there, and another view just along Preston Old Road. So you can see the general appearance of the area, although I'm sure you're all familiar with it. So the main considerations for this application, I'll just run through them in order. So the first is that the site is within a settlement boundary. So policy GD1 in the local plan is permissive of development, providing compliance with other policies. Probably the second most pertinent policy is policy H2. That talks about housing development, and within that policy, there is a part that talks about development on garden land. So I'll just pop back to this slide. So whilst strictly speaking, the land might not be considered to be a garden because it's not a traditional setup in terms of having a house and a rear garden. The land very much has the kind of function and appearance of garden land. Some of the lands adjacent just to the west are indeed gardens, and the Muse to the right, that was garden land previously. So it's considered to be a useful policy to guide our assessment that we've carried out, because it provides basically what it refers to as stringent caveats in terms of design, character, access and amenity. And it also says that any remaining dwellings relying on the remainder of the garden space aren't kind of harmed. So this development isn't taking away the garden from any existing houses. So that element is satisfied. In terms of the loss of kind of some of the open space in the garden, I'll talk about that just when we come on to character in a moment. So highways, Lancashire County Council Highways have raised no objection. In their initial consultation response, they did request more information to help them carry out the assessment that they needed to carry out. That was provided. They reviewed that information and confirmed they had no objection. We have got confirmation from the council's waste services team that waste collection from the site will be possible as well. There have been a number of concerns raised by residents and the parish council about highway impacts, concerns about the use of the access, parking on Preston Old Road and whether or not it would be safe. The existing access is a shared access that provides access to a number of other buildings, as well as the Old Forge building. Highways have looked at it and assessed that the change in terms of how the access is used, the amount of traffic coming in and out, will be negligible and not such that would cause any harm to highway safety. So yeah, in terms of character, I've shown you on the elevation plans that the building is of a scale that's in keeping with its surroundings. It doesn't exceed the height of the other nearby two-storey buildings. It has a relatively simple roof form. It's not kind of visually obtrusive. The other important thing to consider as well is that it is a very well screened from external sites. So from Preston Old Road, there'll be glimpses. From William Pickles Park, there's a strong belt of protected trees that are being retained. From some of the adjacent sites where the Mews to the east, it will be very similar to that type of development. From the houses to the west, where they have their kind of extended gardens that go beyond the shared access, there will obviously be a change on the appearance of that site. So it'll go from an open space to having some building. So that really is where the most notable change will be. However, because of how well contained the site is, how well it's screened is externally, and taking into consideration the fact that the adjacent gardens are very, very long gardens, and the point at which the new built development will be is actually a long way from the rear elevations and like primary garden areas of those houses. Whilst there would be some harm from introducing buildings into that space, it's considered that the slight harm is outweighed by the benefit of delivering housing within a settlement. So the loss of some open space, it is recognised there would be slight harm, but it's considered that harm is outweighed. So trees, I've mentioned trees a few times. So there are protected trees on site. None of the protected trees will be removed or adversely affected by the proposal. They will be retained. A number of trees which aren't protected but have been assessed to have poor health are proposed to be removed. Landscaping is a reserved matter. So there is an expectation that when the applicant applies, provides us with their landscaping proposal, there would be replacement tree planting at a ratio of at least 2:1, which is standard for any development anywhere in the borough. And it's considered that there is space within the site to be able to deliver that. And there's a decent, in terms of landscaping more generally, each of the houses have their own gardens. There's also some shared garden space. So again, there's a good amount of space for landscaping within the site. The residential amenity then, as another consideration, I've talked a bit about it already in terms of the gardens to the west and the impact that it would have on those. The other relationship to consider, I'll just pop back to this one, is in terms of to the Mews development immediately to the east. So the L-shape, the proposed L-shape kind of will come up like this and across here. And the front-to-front relationship between this house that's at the kind of the foot of the L and the front elevation of this proposed house is slightly less than the guideline amounts that we usually use for separation distances, although they're not strict requirements. So in this case, because the established context of the Mews where the houses are set slightly closer together, have a slightly smaller overall scale, it's considered that the introduction of a house at a 45-degree angle, a similar separation distance away, but with a lower overall kind of scale, is considered to be acceptable. There wouldn't be any significant harm that would arise from that. Other separation distances meet those guideline amounts that we have, or are very close to them. And again, there's a very, very healthy separation from the existing dwellings here to where the new dwellings would start further back into the site. Apologies for jumping around slightly. Yes, so then in summary, the site is within the settlement boundary of Clifton. The scale, design, layout of the houses is considered to be appropriate and discreet. It will contribute towards the delivery of housing within a Tier 2 smaller rural settlement, delivering economic and social benefits. Those are the benefits that are considered to outweigh the slight harm that would arise from the loss of some open space within the settlement of Clifton. So the recommendation is for approval subject to the conditions that are within the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Councillor Nixon, and then followed by Councillor Pittman.
Thank you. Could you go back to the slide that shows where the parking areas are? These grey. How do you access that back parking area?
So this one. So
No, at the back. At the very back. Is that a parking area?
no.
Oh well. No. Oh, sorry. Is that right?
Parking area, turning area.
Right.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, but so the parking area doesn't extend that far back into the site. Are you?
All right. Yeah.
Just want to make sure I know exactly what
Yeah.
you're talking about. Were you looking at?
No, I thought that grey hatch. It's not. It's roof, isn't it? Right.
Yeah. Apologies.
Yeah.
It's, as I said, it's maybe it wasn't the best plan to use. This is actually the first floor level plan. So what you're seeing is effectively the bedrooms at first floor level, and because they're in roof level accommodation, those grey parts alongside are the edges of the roof. It's maybe caused more confusion than it
Because I
should have
thought
done.
that
So
when you
apologies.
said grey area, that was
Yeah.
parking. I thought, how do you
Yeah,
get to it? Right, that's fine. Well, that
let's see.
clears that up.
I wonder if-
And then I know there's some reference to protection of it. There's a lot of trees there, aren't there? If we look at the picture that's got the trees on, there are a lot of trees. How on earth is it going to be determined which roots are to which trees when you start digging that ground up? Because how are they going to know which is a TPO tree root and which isn't a TPO tree root? How?
In all honesty, I can't answer that question other than to say that the tree report that's been submitted and reviewed outlines their strategy for protecting trees on site. I'll just review the conditions.
Yeah, it's I'm looking at recommendations prior to any work commencing on
Yeah.
site, ensuring the appropriate root protection
Yes, that's
areas
right. Yeah.
are fenced off and crowns are protected from damage by plant. That's I'm assuming plant means like machinery plant. Yeah. As specified, the prohibition of various activities of the RP must be adhered to. So, how that's those tree roots are going to be huge. As far as I'm aware, as big as a tree is, its roots are as big as the underground.
There
It's
is
going to be impossible to dig up at that site.
There's a method statement in their submitted information. So I'll be honest, with technical tree matters like that, we rely on the advice of colleagues. So I'll have a review of kind of my simple understanding, and it looked reasonable to me. We've had it confirmed that what they're proposing is acceptable, but I too am now, I would say I'm curious about the answer to that question. I can try and find out, but it is considered that their strategy, their proposed strategy is appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
If I can help, and I don't know whether I can, there are protected trees there. There are some that are to be removed because of their condition. So the idea is that the sequence of events would be that the removed trees would be removed to create the necessary space and get them out before the houses are in the way. Then there would be a tree protection fencing erected, and that would remain in place in a agreed location that's going to be outside of the construction zone during the construction process. So the dwellings kind of line up with the dwelling that's already on the aerial image to the east, to the right-hand side. So it does seem that from that image that there is some incursion into the canopy area. So I think it's a fair point that there needs to be some protection of that, because we would normally look for the canopy, the root protection area of the tree typically aligns with the canopy spread. So it's a fair point, but it is a point that's been looked at through the tree report that's been submitted and through the council's office, through the tree officer who's reviewed it.
Yeah, so, I mean, if they get damaged, once the damage, aren't they?
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing you can do to repair it. It's
Well,
done.
there isn't. I mean, obviously, in many cases, trees grow up in this location. In this location, the trees got hard surfacing on two edges, so its roots will
Spread that way, yeah.
spread that way. In that location, the trees don't. So whilst you may be impacting roots to the south, the roots to the north are going to be unaffected because they're into the open space. Whereas the roots in this tree that are on this side are more critical because it has less root spread to use. So there's factors like that come into the way that they assess where the tree protection fencing should go. Have I padded out long enough for you to find the answer?
I was just looking again at the method statement, which I had read, and it does talk about roots and the protected trees and the removal. I think the key kind of element of the explanation as to why there isn't going to be an issue is that the trees that are to be removed are small, common or garden trees, and it talks about their kind of amenity impact, but basically their size isn't as significant, so their roots won't be as deep. So I think part of the explanation is that they won't have to dig quite as deep because these are smaller trees. Still doesn't completely answer that question. It then goes on to talk about
the trees that have been removed.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
and it
right.
then goes on to
They're
talk
obviously not
about
TPO trees,
how they
are they?
plot the they're not how they plot the root protection areas and it talks about British standards, etc. And that's where it kind of gets a bit beyond my my knowledge. So, but the information has been provided. It has been assessed.
Councillor Nixon said the jury's out.
Yeah, well, my response to that is good luck with that one.
Councillor Nixon. Councillor Pittman, followed by Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Do I understand it correctly that there are 2 car parking spaces for each house?
Yes.
Yeah. So there could be a maximum of 10 without visitors.
In terms of the number of cars parking
Right, right. Well, that would be pretty crowded on there,
2-bedroom, one is 1 bedroom.
but still 2 per house. Yeah. I'm not quite sure whether that area can fit, or potential visitors as well. There's a lot there, but and consequently there would be some off-site on the road, which is always very busy on that area. So I've got concerns about whether we're trying to squeeze a quart into a pint pot here. The other the question I've got also is about where do the bins go? Because we could be talking about an awful lot of bins, and the turning area for bin day is quite narrow. I'm just wondering where all this is going to take place. It's not going to be easy.
So there's a refuse store proposed as part of the application, which is effectively in this area here, so bin store area. So that has been that's included in the proposals. In terms of waste access, as I said, we've got comments from the waste services team who've confirmed they've looked at the proposals and confirmed that they will be able to collect waste from the site.
It's not, this bin store is not particularly useful for some of the families that might live certainly further away. So I don't think this is particularly practical, but I also believe that this is going to be a very tight operation. Are they going to be able to drive in these bin lorries and turn round, or are they backing in? Because it's going to be difficult in that quite narrow passage to actually get in there on maybe a busy day. I don't think this is entirely satisfactory, but if highways don't make objections and basically you're saying, oh, there is enough space, but it's tight, I feel.
It's not just highways, it's waste services as well that have said it's okay.
Yeah, I could see that, and maybe they could say, oh, there's enough turning space, but you've got 10 cars there, potentially, and I just don't feel that there's enough space.
You've got a 3-bedroom house.
Yeah, and no bin, and your bins are, you know, at the bottom of the yard, the area.
I think with regards the tightness of the site, it is a relatively compact development. And I think John mentioned in his presentation, that sits alongside the development to the other side, to the east side, which is also relatively compact, and it's got that village feel to it. The bin store is located at the entrance to it, so I suspect the bin wagon would reverse up that alleyway. Obviously the loaders are there, they're able to serve as banksmen and what have you to do that safely, in the way that they reverse up the passageway just the other side of that wall when they collect council's bins from our bin store here, and the flats next door where they do the same down the driveway. The loaders act as banksmen to watch it all work safely. Having the bin store at the entrance is probably better than having individual bin stores dotted around the site, in terms of the visual amenity and the practicalities of accessing it, given that tight relationship. It's kind of a site that's had applications before. It's one that's in the middle of the village. It's, you know, if we're going to see rural development, rural villages grow without growing into surrounding fields, it's this kind of development that we perhaps need to see delivered. And I think that's probably the approach that we've taken when we've assessed the scheme, is that you know there may be some sort of minor compromises over the ideal, but the benefits in bringing forward small properties. Everybody says we need affordable properties in rural villages. Then, you know, this is how it has to happen.
I take your point that basically these sort of areas should be utilised. I think we're packing them in here, and there's too many cars. I am familiar with Dixon's Farm Mews, and to be quite honest, that is so spacious compared with this. So there's a real contrast between the access to Dixon's and also the access here, and the way that the everything's packed in. But I accept your point that no.
Are you finished, Councillor Pittman? Okay, thank you. Councillor Evans and then Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Chair. So this is actually an application in my ward, which is rare that we're looking at. So I've got an interest in it, obviously, above and beyond, and also knowledge of it. I think it would have been handy, actually, if we'd have had two pictures, actually, one going up the side access and one behind, because the only real picture that we've got on screen there is blocked by a van that was parked right in front of it. So you don't get a true visual like I've got on my phone of this site, and I'm a bit torn with it really, because I accept the fact that I would prefer to see small applications of a few properties than large applications in rural areas, but we do need to grow housing stock in rural areas in the same way as we do anywhere else. I've spoken to the shopkeeper, and you know, this is an access road, but it's basically a narrow access lane that goes up the side of his property. It is adjacent to the side property in Dixon's Terrace next door, close next door. It then goes to an L shape, and there's access to the rear of about 5 properties behind. But there's only a couple of vehicles that go up there on a regular basis, and the majority of those people that live in those houses adjacent to the left-hand side as the shop, as you look at it, park on the road. This is a very busy stretch of road. I think the shopkeeper's concerned that any additional traffic which is parked up means that it's minimising where people can just jump out of the car and go in his shop. And as a rural shop, under an awful lot of pressure, you know, that is a genuine concern as that unit. There's also a cafe over the road where, when it's operational, you get workmen all day coming in vans and pulling up along that stretch. So this is a very, very busy little stretch of road, not necessarily with moving traffic, but of parked traffic. And the idea that a bin wagon is going to do a turn into there is for the birds. That doesn't happen. You know, the bin wagon stops in the middle of the road and the guys get out and move the bins to it. It's worth, if you had taken a picture at the back of the shop, you would have seen there are already 6 bins there, 3 brown, 3 green bins, which are attributed to the shop. He brings his bins down on bin day, which will be the same bin day as this collection. So there'll be 6 bins coming in there already at the side of his unit. And my concern is if he happens to be unloading his wholesaler supplies where he would park next to his shop, then it would be very difficult for anybody else to get up and down from there. I know that he's also spoken to LCC and tried to get a loading bay outside the front of his shop, but there's been no response to them from that. I note in the application that the LCC have put the access to an internal turning space falls a long way short of what LCC highways would request for a site to be adopted. The turning area is not suitable for larger vehicles and may create an issue for residents that have deliveries. It would, however, function adequately for light traffic. So it's ambiguous at best, realistically. With the amount of people with Amazon vans and bits and pieces coming in there, I think we're going to add to the problem. It's also a blind crossing, because as a vehicle comes down the side of there, there's a brick wall at the side of it. So it's only as pedestrians are walking up towards the shop that you would see that. Again, I mean, it's a terrible picture, I have to say. You've got a van parked right in front of it. If you'd have moved 2 steps to the left, you'd have been able to see straight up the alleyway. I've got interest in the building behind there, because there's a building to the right-hand side, which I'm assuming is staying in situ, because that forms the boundary wall from the property that we're looking at on the right there. So that storeroom, garage, whatever it may well be, old building, that will be staying in put. And it's the Forge building, which is virtually directly behind the shop premises, which is going. I take on board that these properties are small. They are the 2 bedrooms and 1 bedroom properties. So primarily they are potentially for, let's say, not families, but that's not a guaranteed. So the number of cars will be limited. I don't know if my maths or my vision's not great, but I counted 6 spaces, not 10 spaces at the side of that turning space. What can I see there now? So there's 6 and there's 4 at the bottom, is there? Very, very hard to see the site at the moment because it's so overgrown that you have no aspect that you can look at it and say, once this is cleared, there's land there for that. But, you know, I want to get behind it, but I think there's too many properties in there. I'd be happier if there was 4 rather than 5. I also think we need to put a condition on this, absolutely nailed down, that if it does go through, that then we don't come back and suddenly have double dormers and increase the size of those properties. Because once they become 3 bedroom properties, there absolutely is no way for the amount of traffic. And I've got concerns. Like I say, that access road that comes down there, it is narrow. And if you're going to put a permanent bin store, then are we saying that the permanent bin store is going to be adjacent to that access road? Because if it is, it's adjacent to somebody's garden wall. That's it.
Okay. So number of points. So that last comment there. So the bin store and the storage area is going into effectively the existing Forge building. Is being just refitted to be able to contain that. Externally, the building will look almost exactly the same as it did before. So they're just repurposing that building, so it will be in that position.
Will it be open sided on one side, or will it still be closed on four sides?
So it will be open on the side that faces in this direction, but still closed. Still the walls and roof as existed on the others. So yeah, it will be open facing into the proposed kind of parking court area. In terms of dormers and extensions, the recommendation includes a condition that removes permitted development rights from the dwellings in recognition of that. So if someone does want to do something, they'll need to apply rather than being able to do anything under PD rights. And then in quite a few comments about access and parking. I guess it's always a tension with this type of development between not requiring much more development to deliver lots of parking spaces and really wide accesses but so that it's overdevelopment, but also making sure that they are adequate. So I think Highways comments, they've concluded that they wouldn't sustain an objection, and they're of the opinion that we couldn't kind of defend an objection on that basis. I think they agree with you that there will be some constraints, but it's the nature of the site and the location. So there's always that tension, isn't there, between having parking spaces everywhere and having suitable access and not having them to be too large and for schemes to be dominated by parking and highways. There's a comment about comparison between with the Dixons Mews adjacent to it. Those are larger dwellings. These are smaller ones. That's why there's a bit of a.
They're not huge houses, though.
But they're two-story houses, so they're rather than 1.5. So there is a difference. But yeah, maybe they're not worlds apart, but there is a difference there, and that's why there's a difference in approach in terms of kind of the space standards and layout. So yeah, I think I've tried to provide comments in response to what you said, perhaps to provide some form of explanation as to why we've come to the conclusions that we have.
I notice there are fairly stringent conditions that you've put in here that I think would perhaps reassure some, because particularly the permitted development clause and things like that, because you're talking about 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom houses, and it's just on that basis that you then look at how much traffic's going to go in there and the space that they've got. Also, when it comes to things like access, I'm trying to be consistent here, is that sometimes we might have concerns about that, and then you look at the statutory authority and it goes, no, that's fine. And the local geography, etc., and how the dynamics of that situation are. And when you looked at that photograph, the way the cars were parked, there was one almost infringing on the entrance area. You couldn't turn down there in a sort of right angle way. You couldn't cut across. So there are. I share those concerns, and then it's to what extent we.
It's difficult because if you were going to leave that space open, so there was a bit more space for pedestrians coming through there, then you're immediately infringing on the little village shop where somebody can jump out of the car. The point I'm making is the road is already a congested road, and also I'm mindful of the fact that there was the potential in the first, because the Mews next door is a series of little cul-de-sacs in a way. And there is the option to come in off the first cul-de-sac where there's a fence at the end that would have allowed you to come straight through. But I'm also mindful of when we looked at the appeal for Ash Close, that one of the objections that we put in for that was that we were in effect coming through a previously closed cul-de-sac to create an access. So if you want to be consistent, you know, there's no doubt that the access to these 5 properties will be better served through a proper road access rather than nothing more. What it is actually is access to a back alley, really, rather than a through road. But you know, I've made my observations there, and time will tell. But I don't think it's going to detract from the congestion in the street. It's whether or not it's a payoff for some more affordable housing in a rural setting that you have that extra constraint. One thing that is an issue for us, of course, is during the construction process of these properties, you know, what conditionality have you put in place to make sure that the construction vehicles are actually on site rather than in the road? Because, you know, I don't think the shopkeeper can sustain a business for 6 months while houses are built on his doorstep with construction vehicles, skips and whatever else parked right outside his shop.
I just want to make another point as well. I mean, there was a sort of concern about the Wayne Homes application that we had earlier on, in terms of, you know, the number of 4-bedroom detached properties that they were providing, and we often talk about where are the, never mind 1-bedroom, there's a 1-bedroom here, but where are the 2-bedroom properties that are sort of more affordable housing in some way, you know, providing sort of for people either starting or older people. Exactly. So it is a dilemma, because you're quite right to point out, though, that they're contributing to 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom pool of houses, which is very limited in Fylde, and particularly in village areas, you know, where we often bemoan the fact, don't we, that, you know, the contractors like going for your 4-bedroom and even 5-bedroom houses, because you know what returns they're going to get on that. Whereas here, the returns are going to be a little bit more limited, but they do provide, they are meeting a need for a certain sector of housing, particularly in communities like this one. So it's... Griffiths, did you want to come in? Sorry, and then Councillor Nixon.
My daughter lives in a similar setup than this in Freckleton. You cannot get a bin wagon up between the road and the houses on the street because they live up the road. You forget that Fylde Borough bin men are very helpful, and they run up the hill, get the bins, run down. The vehicle is parked in the entrance to the road, run the bins back up, and off they go. And I assume that's what they'll have to do with this. They're being told they can access it. Oh, well, they've got access. Yeah. They don't even have. Yeah, they'll probably do a similar. Yeah, and they just keep running and off they go. Yeah. I would like to propose this because I think we need more 2-bedroom bungalows in rural settings. So, yeah, okay. I like the look of it.
We have a proposer. Do we have a?
Speak.
Yeah, but I'm just going to see if there's a seconder before we go back to Councillor Nixon. Yeah, we have. So we've got a proposer and a seconder for this. Councillor Nixon.
Just picking up on which it's saying that there are 4 electric vehicle charging points, which is okay, but does that only allow electric vehicles that are charging to be parked there? Because if it does, that takes 4 parking spaces away.
That's not part of the proposal, and electric vehicle charging, it's not something we control now through planning. That's something that's kind of dealt with through, but in the proposal, they're just showing that 4 of the spaces will have electric charging facilities, but that there's no details of any kind of restriction that
I think it's just an unwritten rule. People won't park in them because of people who need to charge a
I'm not sure. I imagine the people who live there would get to know it. If anybody has an electric vehicle, they would park in one of those spaces, and if they don't, they won't. But
I mean, they need to be unrestricted. What if there's nobody there with an electric vehicle?
We're not proposing any restrictions.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. We've got a proposer and a seconder, with Councillor Griffiths proposing and Councillor Ledger seconding this. Can I invite any other comments or questions before we move to the vote? No, we're silent on that. So can we ask all those in favour, please indicate. All those against? Any abstentions? 2 abstentions. Thank you. It's carried. Thank you. We have as he comes in. Reserved planning members, this is item 5. Basically, we have currently, we're allowed 8 subs for the planning committee. We have 8 at the moment, and therefore there are two, thank you, John, by the way, thank you. There are two vacancies. We have 2 names in the report indicated to be added, Councillor Armitt and Councillor Gardner, plus also, which isn't in the report, Councillor Michael Withers. So there are 3 councillors that are being proposed for 2 positions. I'm going to hand over to Councillor Collins now, who's got a proposal.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. 3 of the previous subs were put forward by the previous leader of the independent group without actually asking the members, and they're all in full-time employment. And with council meetings being during the day, none of them have been able to sub. So if we remove Councillor Edward Collins from the list of named subs, that'll leave 3 vacancies, and we can accommodate all 3 proposed names. And this will also enable Councillor Evans to have some cover as well.
So, have we picked that up, what Councillor Collins is? So, in other words, we fill it, we're back to filling the 10 vacancies.
Yeah.
We take one out.
Yeah.
If that's acceptable to everybody, so we have those people in place then. Okay, all those in favour, please indicate. Thank you. It's outline planning permission for the erection of single detached dwelling with all matters reserved, Edgeley School Road, Westby with Plumptons, dismissing an appeal.
Yeah, I haven't done any presentation for it or anything. You'll be probably glad to know from the last presentation I did. This is another single dwelling on a plot where the applicants were claiming that it constituted minor infill development, which is one of the exceptions to the restraint in policy GD4. It didn't. The inspector found the plot was quite wide, so it wouldn't be an infill essentially. So they dismissed the appeal on that basis. We've now, I think we've had 9 appeals on that bit that are very similar to that. So we've got quite a good body of evidence built up from those appeals as to how we should be looking at that particular aspect of the policy GD4. And it's helpful because before this one we had 8, so I highlighted those 8 to the inspector and they swallowed that argument straight up, and now we have 9. So continue to do that.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to read a statement regarding Project Vento, the Stanner Bank, Granny's Bay kiosk and cafe, because you're aware of certain issues and things going on. I better make it very clear that I will read a statement, but I won't answer any questions or comment any further because this is an ongoing live legal matter. And I'd just like Ian Curtis to confirm that that is the case, and that's why, whilst I read the statement out, any discussion of it isn't possible.
Yeah, it still is an ongoing live matter, although not as live as it was, as you'll hear from the chairman's from your statement, Chairman. But until it's finally closed, it is probably better not to have any discussion in what is still in theory a public forum.
But I felt it was important that you as planning committee meetings should receive some information and an update in terms of this statement. Members will recall that the committee approved the council's application for planning permission for an ice cream kiosk at Stanner Bank, Lytham St Anne's, at its meeting on March the 6th. A local resident subsequently began legal proceedings to quash the planning permission on the grounds that two elements of the assessment in the officer report of the effect of planning policy on the application were inaccurate. Following advice from council, and that's council with an S, the council has accepted that one of the elements of the assessment on planning policy in the officer report was inaccurate and has agreed to the planning permission being quashed. Quashing a planning permission would normally result in the application returning to the committee for reconsideration. However, in this case, the council is the applicant, and it has been determined following the receipt of tenders that the proposed development would not provide the rate of commercial return that the council would normally require. The planning application will therefore be likely to be withdrawn and so would not be returning to the committee. I hope that is clear. Thank you. I think that ends proceedings this morning, and I thank you for your time and patience and your deliberation on all the various applications. Thank you.